Anna and Jose Sutton and my son all software together. And it just like a couple months ago when
Say again? I'm gonna go to if you put a multimodal. Oh,
Jim Foster from,
my son.
oh,
I'm not sure where Jose went, but
okay.
I would like to start getting ready to start.
No, I have a
Does that make sense?
multimodal advisory board. I think it is meeting tomorrow. Actually, I should look if it was casual or not.
See where, should we?
All these boards are. Yeah, I have.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. We've got all council here. Is that okay, Tom?
It's really
Are we
good,
on?
yeah. Actually, it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. All right, I know, I don't have my gavel here. But we have all counselors here, so we're gonna go ahead and start, and I guess we will start, please, with a roll call. If we can.
certainly, Councillor Bosman's,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Buell,
Here.
Councillor Woodruff,
Here.
Chair Yazzie,
Here.
and Mayor Youssef.
Here, thank you. All right, we have, can we also announce who else is sitting at the table and joining us, please?
Jose Madrigal, City Manager.
Aaron Hyder, Assistant City Manager.
Mark Morgan, City Attorney.
Okay, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and start. It is, what date are we? We're May 16th. This is the City Council study session. And we are going to start with future new business and review of the agenda. Let's start with the review of the agenda. You all should have copies in front of you of the agendas. And most importantly, this is the time where we look at the agenda for the upcoming study session on June 6th. So everyone take a look at that and let us know if you have any thoughts and or comments.
Looks good to me.
No information only items in that one, Jose? On June 6th, it looks like just direction needed items. It will be June 6th. First Tuesday of the month. Any other thoughts or comments? No? Okay, well, that then, thank you. We will move on then to future new business. And just to remind council, this is our opportunity to bring up topics at a very high level. We won't go into detail here. We'll just see if there is council support for future discussion of any items that council brings forward. Would any councillor like to bring forward an item for new business? Okay. Here we go. Councillor Yazzie.
Okay, so this is concerning the, what do you call it, the roundabout at the end of Third Avenue. I've had several, well, going to have a lot of calls. I've already had two about people being against that. I'm going to have a meeting tomorrow with them. So I would like to figure out how to propose to maybe delete that from the planning documents. Because I went down there and I took a look and there's not a lot of room to put a turning circle there. And I was a little bit concerned when I asked at that virtual meeting if there was enough room for a full-size roundabout. And then the reply was, oh, we'll put a mini roundabout there. And
So
when the
let's-
concern is the radius for turning there.
Understood. Let's not get into too much detail. Let's just, maybe I can ask staff, do we intend to have a discussion regarding the future discussions on Midtown safety? I think that that's under Midtown safety. And I
Yes.
imagine, I think Councilor Yazzie, we will be having future discussions about that. Do we know when?
Very good.
just so that Counselor Yazzie might be able to tell her constituents
Sure,
that
absolutely.
update.
Yes, hi, Sarah Hill, Transportation Director. We're going to give a very brief update today in our conversation on the art connections, but then we can find a time to come to council if our questions don't answer or our answers don't answer your questions today. And you want a deeper dive into it, then we can schedule
Great.
another time.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Counselor Yazzie.
Mhm.
Any other counselors have new business?
Yes, I have a new business item following our newly established city council office hours. So I thought I'll give an update during the council liaison updates during the regular meeting at the end. I think that probably would be a good thing to add to the agenda as well. I'm not sure if it was. But this one, I think I'll bring up as new business, as a new business opportunity. I met with Ms. Cohen during the city council office hours. She is the lady that has brought several times forward through email a pet store ordinance to ban retail sale of puppies and kittens in pet stores. She mentioned she had over 100 signatures, including several pet stores and the Humane Society, and she emailed earlier a model ordinance. So my question is there support from council to have this discussion on a potential ordinance brought forward, potentially directly with opportunity to have the ordinance? It seems not too much of a complex topic, but maybe it has to start with a study session or something that we can do at a faster track.
Thank you, Counselor Bosmans. I don't know much about it myself yet, but I'm interested in learning more. Other counselor thoughts?
You know, instead of doing an ordinance, is it possible to maybe make a recommendation?
I think it starts either with so normally you have new business. So we bring up something that in this case, someone in our community brought forward. And instead, we're not really discussing the topic. We're just saying, are we going to discuss this in the future? And then we'll have a scheduled meeting and then whatever the consequences of that meeting.
Other counselors?
I'd certainly entertain the discussion.
Yeah, I support that.
Okay,
So just a discussion about what it would entail, how many, like a general background discussion, and then the council can give direction from there. Is that kind of the item we're looking for?
Yeah, I think we have some information already. So if you can look at the information, present something, what we can do, and then see if there's council support to make an actual motion on moving forward with something, if that's what we feel like should be doing.
So if council wants to discuss it formally at a future meeting, I would suggest that because you've gotten the feeling here that it is something that's worth discussing. And you have a model ordinance, correct?
Yeah, I was emailed to
Yeah,
council.
Why don't you submit the model ordinance to the administration and then let them report on it? And at that point, you can decide if you want to make a formal motion at a formal meeting.
Okay, so that would be the recommendation.
well, we started a study session. We often do start at a study session when we're kind of trying to disseminate the information and learn more. So, okay, that's what I would suggest, Jose, to start at a study session sometime in the future. Thank you.
Were you copied on the email?
I don't know, but make sure.
I think that I may be copied into it, but I'll see.
Counselor Bosmans, thank you. Do you have any other?
I have no other.
I look
Actually,
forward to hearing about the office hours.
actually, can I make another new business?
Yes.
I think we really need to address the homeless managed camp. We have purely the homeless managed camp option. We have done the coordinating council, which is the pathway out of homeless. But I think we are seeing, and at least I'm physically seeing, an increase in potential conflicts. And I think we need to address this. And I'm asking if there's council support to bring the homeless topic, the managed camp for the homeless population, on the agenda.
I'm going to say with the plans that we have with
what Luke presented on, and I don't know if the new council heard his presentation. That was like, what, 3 meetings ago, I want to say, where it was funded and we're moving forward with that aspect of it, like you just said. And then with the municipal code, Sarah Law, and those updates that are happening, I think Friday is that meeting that starts or that discussion is starting. I'm not quite sure. But I want to see where that path forward leads rather than coming and starting the homeless camp discussion again when we don't have those 2 things resolved personally.
Counselor Woodruff, thoughts?
I'm gonna punt this one.
Sorry.
I think we should absolutely have the conversation. I think that's something that Gilda and I both in our forums discussed that it needs to be addressed. And so I'm entertaining the discussion, but I would like to know a little bit more background about what's in process. I don't want to reinvent the wheel if there's already positions in place to be able to do better, not double up the work.
Counselor Yazzie?
Exactly what Dave said. I am in favor of having the discussion. I would like to have the minutes from the 2 meetings that Jessica mentioned. And if there's any background material, especially about the ordinance not to allow residents to sleep in the parks, I think that was it. Maybe if we get a good background for Dave and myself, and then we're open to discussion, I think that's a very good start.
I think I turned myself off. I support that as well.
Just, I wanted to clarify one thing. I accept the direction given by council. And I just want to clarify, this is not about the continuum of care or the addressing the symptoms with the police. It is about the managed camp. But
I think
unless
we
that
have
changes,
direction. I
then
think we
it's
have
fine.
direction. Any other new business? Okay, great. With that.
Can I
then-
just get a clarifying?
Yeah.
And sorry, I was trying to do the puppy ordinance also, getting that to staff. Was it just that you wanted an item that would, or I'm sorry, would you want us to send out the information, kind of a background information to the council
That
first?
would be great. It sounds like.
What was looking for?
There's not direction to have a discussion about homelessness yet.
It's
I personally said I wanted to see the conversation that Luke brought forward a few weeks ago, where that's headed. And I don't want to
Background,
repeat
gotcha.
everything that we've already done. And so they want information and background, could be on a one-on-one with you or sending minutes out or whatever it is. But there.
perfect.
Thank you for that wrap up, Counselor Buell. Mayor Pro Tem Buell, appreciate it. Okay, now moving on to information only items. We will start with budget and strategic plan update. Devin.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Devin Schmidt, Acting Chief Financial Officer. And so for our budget and strategic plan update today, just wanted to take council through what the budget calendar looks like and some pieces around the public engagement process that we have teed up for 2024 budget. So the former council may be aware, and maybe new council as well. The budget process really starts in February with the strategic planning kickoff pieces, followed by the department's budget. We did kick off budget and sent the information out to the departments yesterday. So they will have until August to work on those budgets. From there, it goes to the city manager's office, and city manager's office works on that September through October. And then it comes to city council in October, November timeline is where it's really city council's budget at that point. And then we'll look to adopt in December. So just wanted to provide that process update. I also wanted to present council with the budget and strategic plan calendar. You'll see on here where there is council or department kind of action by who. The biggest piece on here that we're tentatively hoping for is to do the budget retreat on October 10th. So we will definitely have Kyle reach out and make sure that works with everyone's calendars, but That'll be the kind of the big piece here. So trying to get that out front and early so we can get that scheduled. But as council can see, it's a pretty lengthy process. There's a lot that goes into the budget process. And so just wanted to be able to show you all everything that's happening on there.
Thank you so much for in getting that date on the calendar early. I think we had an issue with it last year, so I'd love to make sure we all have that down. I know how important it is once it's set. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you.
Devin, I have one question. Okay, so I know that the county is going ahead and going to do something down there at Bodo Park for some kind of rehab housing project. Now, how would they go about getting a proposal to the city to add to that budget for next year?
I would say that that would happen in one of the joint county city council meetings.
Okay.
No, no problem at all. Absolutely.
I have a little question too. I'm not sure if anybody else had a question. I see that there is the mid-year budget adjustment scheduled for August 15th.
Mhm.
Will we get an update on the capital improvement projects, the capital projects year to date or mid-year prior to that mid-year budget adjustment, as it would give us the opportunity to see if certain projects are not moving forward, the ability to allocate or change direction and make other projects move forward?
Yes, absolutely. So our team is working on finishing up the Q1 financial reports. And with that, we'll include the capital projects about where they're at, what the total budget is, what's been spent, and all those pieces to it. So
Now, as a follow-up on that, I really appreciated the capital project list you provided in December, which showed everything in one table. Is there a possibility to get a similar one-page summary of all the capital projects?
yes, yep. So the Q1 report will have them all in just listed out. It'll say whether they're pre-design, design, construction, or completed. And then we have that little mapping feature that has where the project is located. So that will be included for that. And it's a one pager. So we should have that out to council in pretty short order. Obviously our focus has been on getting the 2022 audit completed. So appreciate the patience as we finalize that report.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No problem. So for the public process, we learned with the 2023 budget that the town halls sometimes are not as attended as we would appreciate. So we're going to do one town hall this year. Through June and July, we will have the current boards review the prioritization of the CIP projects, and then those will go to the financial advisory board for project review. We will launch again our budget and strategic plan survey that goes out to the community so we can understand what our different priorities are. And then we will also attend a couple farmers market booths so that we are able to have that level of engagement with the community in a little bit less formal setting. We also will have the 2 public hearings that we always do for the budget. And so just wanted to provide all those different opportunities that we'll be working with the community on that. Any questions? Short and sweet.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions, council? Thank you for the update, Devin.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, so we're ahead of schedule. We'll move on to community development process improvements and forthcoming code updates with Scott Shine.
Daniel Murray is our development services manager, and Eva Henson. Oh, I thought we were going to surround. No, I'm just kidding. Eva Henson, our housing manager, will also be presenting to you this afternoon. Thank you for giving us some time. I know process improvement and code updates might not sound very exciting, but we are very excited to share with you some of the work we've been doing And we wanted to start by sort of laying the foundation of where this was coming from, how this fits in overall to the organization's efforts related to high performance and continuous improvement and community engagement. So I'm going to start with a little bit of information on that, our departmental work plan, our departmental structure, our customer service strategy, and then we'll dig into some of the details on forthcoming code updates. So we have probably about 3 points here where we can stop and kind of take questions and sort of a reasonable break between topics. So we'll move through the sections and then take time to pause and see if there's any questions or feedback at those points. So, but feel free to jump in if you have any clarifying questions or anything else. So we're going to touch on, like I said, the overview and the work plan for the Community Development Department. We're going to fill you in on what's been happening related to our board and commission refresh. This was initiated alongside the work that was just completed about the advisory boards. But because the boards and commissions that community development staffs, most of them are quasi-judicial and not advisory, it's going to take a little bit more time to do the code red lines, prepare the ordinances. It's not quite as simple as it was for the advisory boards with resolutions. So we'll fill you in on some of the details there and some of the outreach we've been doing to look at that proposal and get feedback from our existing citizen volunteers. Daniel will talk a bit about process improvements and ways that we're utilizing some technology and platforms to better serve our customers, and also some fee update proposals related to land use applications and building permits. And then Eva will close it out with a pretty exciting and innovative affordable housing fee offset policy and some other quick housing updates. So we'll jump right in. We're excited to present on behalf of our team. These is really the people who are making it happen day in and day out. We've got a lot of really motivated people who care about the community, and we've got great alignment with the overall organization on being a department that seeks continuous improvement and high performance. We've been working a lot with the Public Works Department, a lot with transportation, the city attorney's office to kind of go through these things. So while we're sort of leading the charge on a lot of these things, it is truly interdepartmental collaboration as well. So just wanted to introduce you to the team there with that shot. Some of this, the three counselors have heard, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but I wanted to take the time for Counselor Yazzie and Counselor Woodruff just to refresh and inform on sort of the departmental structure and especially our work plan for the year. So this illustrates how we've organized ourselves around this concept of building community together as really galvanizing everything that we do and summarizing the different things that we do. We have 3 parts to our department: development services, which Daniel leads as the development services manager. That's code enforcement, building inspections, development review. So things like subdivision plats, site plans, that's the work that development services does. And then housing, livability, and economic opportunity. Eva's the housing manager. Tommy Crosby's our economic opportunity manager. And then Savannah Lytle is a planner that really focuses on community engagement. Long range planning is how we refer to that. So comprehensive planning, placemaking, those types of things related to livability. So all of that is really, we feel like it's really important that all of those entities are housed in one department. It allows for a lot of synergy and cross collaboration, I think particularly between housing and development services, syncing up our partnership efforts with residential development to make sure the process is well run and effective in delivering needed housing units. So we've started to flesh out that idea of building community together. I won't pause on this too long, but we're going to take this over the next few months and really identify metrics that show how are we accomplishing our goals related to customer service, We're going to define that a little bit more as far as our commitments to our customers and to the broader community, and then also what we expect from our customers to make sure that that process is working well. I do want to level set as we get into process improvement and we talk about ways of improving customer service. You're still going to get emails from upset property owners, developers, business owners. I don't want to pretend that that's going to just go away. But what we want to give you is confidence that the processes that we're going through are equitable, are transparent, that we implement those standards that the community has identified as important consistently, and we communicate that clearly. It's never going to be fast enough. It's never going to be cheap enough. And I just want you to understand that dynamic of what we're trying to accomplish by having standardized reviews, again, consistent and clear communication, even in the midst of differing opinions with our customers sometimes. So we've started to integrate this into our space. Our space is looking more and more temporary for now, which is River City Hall. But we wanted to start to provide a better experience for our customers when they come in. We're leading with this messaging. We're talking about the goals we're trying to accomplish during our review processes and those types of things. Just simple things like, adding some plants and other things to make that initial encounter a little more inviting. We're not doing major investments into River City Hall, but this will help set the stage for our next location of how we want to interact with those customers and design that space where we have that first encounter. Tommy reminds us a lot, we are often the first encounter that a citizen, a new business owner, an investor, a developer has with the city. And so we take that very seriously. We want to make sure that that is a quality experience, both, visually, aesthetically, and interpersonally. So we've done some work based on the strategic plan and based on some staff conversations. We've developed our work plan for the year that orients around these four kind of functional areas. Again, we've shared this before. We shared this with our boards and commissions, but just as a reminder, these are the four areas that we're focusing on, and all our activities are falling within this and also leveling up to strategic plan goals. I wish we could share all the different things that are happening in all these areas today, but we're going to focus on these two areas for today. We've got some really exciting things going as far as partnerships. Eva and Dan hosted a great neighborhood meeting yesterday on a public-private partnership for workforce housing at the intersection of Florida and East Animas Road. We got amazing support for that from even, we're proposing to upzone that to high density residential, and people came out in support saying, we love what you're doing, bringing workforce housing to our community. And I think we all just left like, whoa, all right, this is really good to get that type of feedback. And they did a great job communicating the benefits of the project. That's a project where we're bringing land to the table, and combining that with some adjacent parcels to make it a more cohesive and a larger development site. So you'll be hearing more about that later, not today, but that was a good way to start the week yesterday evening. So we're focusing in on these two areas. When we look at process improvement and customer service enhancements, we're talking a lot about utilization of upgraded software, making sure people can see the status of their projects, making it convenient for them to pay, to get those status updates, to communicate with us. We're doing a lot of work, like I said, with Public Works and with DFPD on standardizing reviews and sort of the scope of review so people know what to expect and are getting consistent feedback. We're looking at ways to expedite and streamline high priority projects, which is a delicate thing to do, but we're trying to come up with criteria that aligns with recent state legislation around Proposition 123 for residential projects to get those through in an efficient way. When we think about code reform, the areas in the green here are what we're going to talk about today. The yellow are things that are in process and will be coming back to you in the future in more detail. We're also excited to bring on a new staff member, and their title is going to be Code Reform Administrator. And so we're going to have somebody in-house who is focused on making sure that we continue to lead in our efforts to align the code with the broader planning documents and the vision for the community in the comprehensive plan, what we're hearing from neighborhoods, what we're hearing from the business community about how we want to manage growth. That's a pretty unique and I'd say innovative approach to code reform. A lot of people, a lot of municipalities will just contract that out on an as-needed basis, but we felt like we have so much work to do in this area. We wanted someone in-house focused on that explicitly to make sure we're keeping up with all the changes and staying on top of best practices. So that individual is going to start in June, and we'll be sure to bring her back and introduce her to you all. They will also be doing a lot of community outreach and engagement on those topics. So we'll be working really closely with the new community engagement strategy to implement that. So that's the overview. That's where this is, again, coming from, how it has taken shape and how we've identified priorities. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the board and commission reconfiguration or refresh. There was a memo in your packet that has a lot more detail. And if you have questions, I'll pause at the end of this and we can dig into it. Community development currently supports 6 different boards and commissions. 5 of those are quasi judicial. One, the Creative Economy Commission, is more of an advisory commission. So we looked at that, and along with the work done with the advisory boards, we said, how would we set this up if we were going to kind of start fresh and look at what are our intended outcomes here? Where are the inefficiencies or the lack of clarity in the current structure, and how can we address those things? One of the big things we hear, and even for our staff team that's confusing or sometimes contradictory, is we have a design review board and we have a planning commission. And there's a lot of overlap in what those 2 entities look at when they have a project before them. If it's one major type of project is a major site plan review, it will often go to design review board for early design guidance, go to planning commission for a public hearing, and then go back to design review for design guidance. And sort of in that mix, there's sometimes design review board starts talking about maybe density or landscaping or things a little bit outside their purview. Planning commission starts talking about design or architectural features. And there's just a lot of, like I said, overlap. And so that's really where we focused. How do we make that more clear? How do we make sure we're getting high quality development? Because that's what we expect and we want in Durango. And that's what the design review board helps to accomplish. How do we not lose that focus, but still kind of look at merging those boards? The other one is the Board of Adjustment. That is required by the city's charter for variances to the Land Use and Development Code. That board, I think, has met once in the past 2 years. And so we saw an opportunity there. We can't just dissolve that or say it's not needed because it's in the charter, but is there a way that a board can maybe provide multi-functions and serve as the Board of Adjustment when needed, instead of having this board that's 5 volunteers that don't feel like they're really contributing because they're meeting once every 2 years. So we're proposing to combine those 3 boards into one new board that is called the Planning and Design Commission. Planning Commission, Design Review Board, and the BOA are all 5 members right now with an alternate. We would propose that Planning and Design Commission be a 7-member board with 1 alternate. And for 3 of those positions, we would have a requirement that they have some expertise, experience, education in sort of architectural design, engineering, other types of elements related to the design of a project. So we want to preserve, again, that emphasis on high quality design. And so that's how we propose to do that, is have sort of some qualifications for 3 of those positions. This will take quite a bit of work, quite a bit of code red lines. We're hoping not to have to touch the charter, but we'll work with Mark and others on investigating the way to do that. The Planning and Design Commission would, as we're proposing it, would be able to convene as the Board of Adjustments if needed. They would sort of be called as the entity that could fulfill that function per the charter. And so again, it's not just a board that's there, not really meeting, but it's a functional board. And when we have a need for those types of reviews, they are able to fill that need. The other boards, Historic Preservation Board is required by the state in order for us to be what's called a certified local government. So we're not proposing any changes to that. There's some interesting approaches that our staff has taken to get projects reviewed by a subcommittee instead of the whole board, and that's making things a little bit quicker. But other than that, we're not proposing to touch the Historic Preservation Board or the URA board, another board that's governed by state statutes. So those two we're going to leave alone. The Creative Economy Commission, as Councilor Buell, Mayor Pro Tem Buell knows, has been investigating how does that commission interact with the nonprofit Durango Creative District? What are some responsibilities that they could take on that the Creative Economy Commission currently fulfills? And what are the things that we still need more of a city commission to fulfill? We think that would line up well with the working group model that is being developed from community engagement, particularly related to public art and the city's public art collection and administration of the lodgers tax, arts and culture funding. We think a working group could be convened to review those applications, make some decisions, and then disband once that funding is decided on. So those are the 6 boards and the items that we're looking at. We have reached out. I have a summary here of the ways that we've engaged with those current boards and commissions. We want to make sure that it's not a surprise for them, that they have input. I will say overall, there's been a lot of support, particularly on Design Review Board and Planning Commission. I think they see that there's this inefficiency and confusion, and they also want to get that cleared up. There has been some feedback about the specifics of that and how we manage that transition, but overall there's support for this direction. We presented this to the Code Alignment Working Group in late 22 and early 23. We had a board and commission reception in January where we gave a high level overview of what we're thinking about. We had a joint planning commission city council meeting. That was the beginning of February, and shared the details. And then also at the design review board meeting in March. So just so you feel comfortable that we are engaging with those people and getting their feedback, I wanted to share those dates. I think that's all I have on boards and commissions. If you all want to share anything else, and now's maybe a good time to pause and see if you have any questions or feedback on that.
Okay, I think it's great that you're doing the code realignment and adding new structure to that. But I was curious, are you getting rid of the old codes that are no longer effective when you're going through that? It's not just piling it upon piling it. You're getting rid of the old stuff.
Yes, and Daniel will share a little bit more about some process improvements that relate to code updates. But generally, yes, when we are consolidating those boards and commissions, that is a simplification or consolidation of a lot of code language.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other things we want to address. I showed you that list, so we're not all tackling that right now.
Yeah, I was just concerned about the language, so it doesn't,
Yeah.
long-term, as we look at these documents, the stuff that's no longer relevant that you're deleting.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
I had a couple of questions, and maybe it's premature to even ask this. Will ADUs be a part of that codification revamp at all?
We have done some recent updates to the ADU program. I think overall we feel pretty good about where it's at.
Okay.
EVA has also launched a rebate program for fees related to ADUs, and we're seeing an uptick in interest.
Okay.
So if there's specific things you want us to look at, we're happy to do that. But I don't know when that was probably early 22 when we did our
Yes.
last round of code updates.
Yeah, we had done some community outreach to just a broader audience. We also did surveys to the ADU current owners to really input and provide rental info and some other components that could help inform those code amendments. From that, then we were able to use some of the funding from the housing fund to create the ADU rebate program as well. So far we have seen an uptick in the ADU inquiries as well as limited use permits for ADUs and construction of new units.
Okay, great. Thank you.
In order to get that fee rebate, they need to commit to renting, is it for 2 years?
For 2 years.
To a local worker. So that's
Yeah.
the return on that investment.
What is the oversight? Is that by staff to ensure that somebody is playing by the rules?
Yes, so
Okay.
we built into the program through the housing coordinator position as well. So additional resources to the Housing Innovation Division for that enforcement and compliancy. We also developed an employment verification form. So we are monitoring and checking that before the rebate has been issued. We're also reviewing the leases. So we're kind of getting a pretty extensive checklist before the rebate's issued.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And does anybody else have anything? I've got one more question, but yeah, okay. Sorry. So you're gonna get another staff member for aligning the code with planning and community. I don't know how else to ask this, but how are they going to do their job? Like, where are they going to receive direction, and how are they going to be able to best effectively give direction to that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've started to write basically like a 3-year work plan for them based on all the things like Councilor Yazzie mentioned. We have a stack of things we want to address. And what often happens with our planning staff, what comes in the door is what's urgent, what has a timeline on it. And so they get a project application for, a development, and they get sucked away and they have to focus on that. And it's easy to kind of drop the code amendments or the long range planning things. And so our goal with this position is to have somebody who's informed about development review and knows that process, but is sort of protected from that tyranny of the urgent and the when an application comes in. And so they're talking to our staff. I envision one of the first things that they're going to do is a series of roundtables with business owners, developers, consultants, and just listening sessions to say, where have you run into issues with the code? What things are causing projects to not work out for you? So starting with that. So that'll be a great source of information. Obviously, Council Planning Commission can provide input through Jose on items that they like to see addressed. So
Right on.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll just say thank you for the upfront outreach with the boards and commissions. I think it's great, and obviously some lessons learned from the past and what we've been doing. And so it's great to see us like really doing what we say we're going to do, and being upfront and doing good community outreach. And then I love the community support for the new project potentially to increase density, because I know it's hard sometimes to find that balance between maintaining the spirit and character of why we all love Durango, and then also, increasing density so we can have more houses for our workforce and stuff. And so finding that balance of doing both is super awesome. And thank you so much for your hard work with that. I appreciate it.
Sorry.
I think, like we said at the beginning, our team is really passionate. We're really fortunate to have well-trained and experienced individuals, but it is hard. Sometimes we kind of say, all the easy sites in Durango have been taken. And so all the sites that are left are challenging. There's a reason they haven't been developed yet. And it's tough to find a balance. I think getting the support from you and from Planning Commission goes a long way to make sure when we are headed in the right direction, that it's communicated to them, and also continuing to keep our focus on the outcomes and the vision of what we're doing, and not getting too beat down by some of the hard things. So thank you for saying that.
Any other thoughts, Council? I sure appreciate your efforts as well. Thank you, guys. I feel like we're making made some really great strides in community development. And it really does make sense to me, this, with your 6 boards, the consolidation that you're discussing, it, the continued reduction of inefficiencies and redundancies, it makes a lot of sense. So I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Buell that thank you very much for the outreach in advance with those boards and commission members. I think it's so important. And thanks for your efforts. And I think that the planning, the community development office looks great. And I think all those plans are movable, so you can keep adding to those. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Daniel Murray. I'm actually going to walk through 3 examples of our work plan, and then Eva has a 4th. So what we're looking at next is an example of process improvement by way of better utilization of software. So this is actually citywide. And the first example of what we're doing here is transitioning from our enterprise software to City Suite. And that's as much impactful to finance as it is ComDev, because we're both utilizing that software. So here we are presenting on something that our IT department is rolling out citywide, and you have various departments actively waiting for this upgrade, which is one way for us to then, once we're in City Suite, utilize other software better. So you've heard the word OnBase a lot, because I know that's where you find your packets and that's where your agendas are stored. Well, OnBase not only does agendas, it does minutes, but it's also our repository. It's our archive. We want to be able to gracefully and seamlessly get documents into OnBase digitally without scanning. So digital native projects, materials. And that sounds like it makes perfect sense. This is the 21st century. Well, we're still getting there, and this is something that we really want to accomplish this year. Everything builds on the next. So once we have updated the City Suite, once we feel like we've got digital documents, we would like to make a public-facing portal. And the feature that's been provided to us is called Citizen Access. So hopefully this year, early next year, we will have a place for a citizen to go and look at a project file, look at the status, make a payment, submit, all the things you'd expect to be doing in this day and age. So those are the top 4 bullets. And then we also have a lot of internal work that's occurring with our software. Really, it's utilizing it better. There's been a higher expectation, I think, of reporting out to council, reporting out to the public. And if we're using our software properly and to its potential, we can do a better job of reporting. So we can get you good comparables. We can show the progress that we believe we're making in terms of timelines and outcomes. And these are one example of how we're making process improvements more from a software standpoint. That's my first of 3 topics. Any insight or input on that particular topic?
What did you say the timeline was?
Well, long overdue.
I appreciate that.
This year and next.
This year and next.
Yes.
And so when you say you don't have to scan it, so you'll just be able to take that document.
It would have
and
arrived
file?
electronically. Yes, believe it or not, we actually are pretty paper intensive. No,
Yeah.
that was pre-COVID. Post-COVID, we actually forced ourselves to become digital documentation, but right now there's still a lot of work being done.
Mhm.
We would like those documents to be uploaded into OnBase the first time.
It just sounds great.
Yeah.
Yes, let's do it.
All right, moving on to my next topic would be an example of the process improvement and code reform. So we are looking for ways to create efficiencies and improved effectiveness in our permitting process. Now, the land use code, as you would imagine, prescribes a process for a project type. Say subdivision, it needs to go to PC, it needs to go to council. So we asked ourselves, are there any project types that can either be shifted from council to planning commission and similarly from planning commission to administrative staff? We also are asking ourselves, could planning commission utilize consent agenda, because they don't currently have that feature? You're familiar with that feature, but honestly, you're using consent agenda rather lightly. It's just for minutes and other items. We would like to introduce consent agenda for public hearing, which could public hearing items, which is a big step forward. And there are other jurisdictions that do that. So we're trying to find a way to still balance public process, due process, with efficiency. And we think the consent agenda can be more fully utilized. So our objective here is to right size the review process with the time, which is money for developers, and staff's resources, so we can be more focused on projects. while not compromising standards. We're not at all considering here changing a standard or changing noticing requirements. We're just looking purely at process. So when we look at our table of projects, and it is just that, it's in the land use code. We have 3 examples here that we can offer to Planning Commission. For example, you're very familiar with plan development. Plan development is a project that doesn't precisely fit the code. Therefore, we have to find a way to come to an agreement surrounding that development. And oftentimes plan developments need amendments. So a major PD amendment goes right to council. Our question is, could that go to PC? Because the PD itself has already been approved. We're talking about the tech center was another example, a recent example of a PD that needed amendment. So the use that was occurring wasn't prescribed, and we had to come to multiple hearings to get that use added. That use was very similar to the other uses. It just wasn't written down 20 years ago. So amendments we think could be done at the PC level. Minor amendments we think could actually be done administratively, because PDs, as you would imagine, set forth, like the land use code, very specific uses or standards. If there needs to be a change to that, it's not in of itself a big change. It's just something that we didn't anticipate. A third example would be final development plans, shifting those from Planning Commission to administrative staff. A development plan has been through a public hearing already. Final is really just dotting the i's and checking or crossing the t's. It's making sure all the conditions have been met. So that seems like a very logical item to just be done administratively. Those are 3 examples of how we are wondering if council would like us to pursue these types of changes, or if there are ideas that you have seen where you've heard a project come before you and you thought to yourself, I think our planning commission could have handled this. This seems very routine, and go ahead and think on this over the next couple months. Go ahead.
I just have one question with that final development plan. When you're shifting it from PC to administrative, so would that be the final improvement with the architect and the punch list to do the final walkthrough? Or is that just for okaying a change order to that plan?
Based on your wording, I would call it the okay. It's the approval for them to go forward with the development.
Okay.
It's often referred to as the entitlement. It's what someone needs. It's a land use permit that says, now I can go and build 3 units. They haven't done anything yet, but it's us verifying, or in a commercial setting, there's often many conditions.
Okay.
If you can think of recent projects that have come before you, it's us verifying that the public improvement agreement's in place and that they're going to make the sidewalk improvements in the road and all those requirements that we have plans for it. So those are examples of what we think we can shift. We're open to hear from council. Is this the right direction? Are there other examples? And are you supportive of a consent agenda that may be a little more substantive? Planning Commission only doesn't use it at all, and I see it more frequently for minutes or resolutions that were more of a formality.
Just to clarify.
Go ahead.
If I can just interrupt. So I would love council to be able to answer those questions. I think council might have an opinion, but just to clarify, I think we are under information only items. So you guys were going to just present to us. So, but are you seeking, would you like, it sounds like you kind of want direction on this from council?
We are wanting to know if you would like us to pursue these types of code revisions.
Okay, counselors, I think we might be able to, some of us have kind of had some exposure to this
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I love that you're thinking about this. There's a lot of times where things come to us as a counselor and they're like, oh, you'll see this again. So don't worry. And I'm like, why do we have to see it again? Like here, it's just, it just doesn't, sometimes it doesn't make sense. I think the pushback we will have is controversial, obviously, developments or something that, and so I think we need to be careful as to how we use that consent agenda. I do think we do a good job right now on the regular council meeting with the consent agenda, just making sure that we don't have, if there is a controversial item or something that we know is going to want, more discussion and comment, we usually put it under a different, area, just so it doesn't look like we don't want to ever look like we're hiding anything. We're not hiding anything. It's more just for smooth process, because there is a lot of times that things are going to the planning commission twice, or design commission once, to staff 5 times, to council 3 times. And it's like the easiest project that everyone supports. And so that seems redundant and silly. And so I can't tell you how to do that or write that, but that's just kind of my personal feedback in terms of what I've experienced as a counselor.
I agree that optics are a big part of this. Would something like the Mercy Hospital project be kind of qualified under some of these examples?
I'm reluctant to speak to current projects, but hypothetically, a commercial use such as that does have a rather lengthy process, especially when it's in the plan development.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's an example of something we're trying to find efficiencies.
Okay.
Councilor Bosman?
Thank you for the update. I think the intent is definitely good to simplify this. I wanted to get some information from you because you were on the La Plata land use code changes, which are similar to simplify the process and move certain responsibilities further down the organizational structure. Have you seen negative consequences on the county level, which is going to be very similar, I think, in the land use and development code changes? Any
Right.
feedback that you got over your experience?
Right, so the county adopted a new code in 2020, and so I had about 2 years working with that new code. And I'd say what we're suggesting and what the county experienced is common when you gain a level of comfort. Now, the city's code is 2014. You gain a level of comfort that what we're seeing can be shifted further down in review, still maintaining the standard and still maintaining a public process. So that was certainly the county's objective, was to shift as much as they could down to staff and planning commission level. County historically had a significant number of projects going to Board of County Commissioners. So city council can similarly say, yes, I need to see this once. I don't need to see it twice. So that is what I think we're expressing to you now, almost 10 years into our code. There's a lot of caution when you write a code in the beginning, but 9, 10 years later, we say these things can be delegated down to planning commission and staff.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I think you should go with it because to make the process for construction easier, it's more cost effective and it's using less work hours. So I think it's a good move. Although if there's big items that you think need to have a second look at, I'd be for bringing it forward to council.
Well, I think you're hearing some direction from council. I would support the direction that they've agreed to as well, which is to move forward in this direction and continue your exploration, but it seems like you're on the right path.
Okay, so process wise, we did take this idea to the Code Alignment Working Group, which is what I think its role is. And they were certainly saying, great, but make sure council gives this direction first, because they were not in a position to delegate any review. So we'll go ahead and come up with red lines. We'll go back to the Code Alignment Group. We'll go to Planning Commission, then we'll come to you. So you'll get to see an actual outcome changes. So that's
Great timeline on that ish.
What we suggested in the packet is coming back to you probably in the fall of 23.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So that's topic number 2 for me. My third and final topic, which then dovetails into what Eva is going to be presenting. This is an example of process improvement, but not necessarily process, more organizational, good and best practices when it comes to fees. So the city has a variety of places from which we generate funds. Building permit fees is one of them. And these funds obviously go towards the services that we provide. And community development is a large department. And in general, this is one way in which we provide services to the community, which I would generally describe as a safe building environment and making sure we're meeting energy codes and other codes to create a safe built environment. So currently our building valuation fees are 2013. and they were adopted in 2015. So I think ideally we'd be on a 5-year rotation, but 2020 was not the time to be adjusting fees. So understandably so, we're 10 years outdated on our valuations. And what municipalities commonly do is they rely on the International Code Council valuations. These are the cost of construction nationwide. And that's what's in your packet. The ICC breakdown of what it costs to build a single family home, multifamily home, or commercial. Now, when you look at these numbers, you'll say, no way is anyone building $107 a square foot. So these are national averages. These are knowingly quite low. But again, I think that speaks to how we're trying to be reasonable. We're $107 now, and we're proposing, if we were to use 2023 valuations, $167. Still, no one is building for $167 a square foot for a single family home. And I'll stay with the single family home example because I think that's the easiest for us to understand. And your packet actually speaks to what the cost of a home would be, a 1,500 square foot home at $167. That's a $277,000 home. Again, that does not exist in our community. No one's can build that cheaply, but these are national averages. And I think if one were to be setting fees, it's very rational and defensible to be using national standards. So that's what staff is recommending, because we looked at other jurisdictions too. They use flat fees, they use actual fees, which I don't believe at all would be advantageous for our community, the actual cost of construction. And I think when it comes to a flat fee, I'd be hard pressed to pick a number. We'd ultimately probably rely back on ICC. So we are suggesting that we update our building permit fees, looking for direction if this is what you want us to pursue. In terms of kind of where I started with strategic plan goals, there is a fiscal responsibility to make sure we're keeping up to date and to ensure that we have a balanced operating budget, are the words used in our strategic plan. So this is one way in which the city can make sure that's happening. And we also took this topic to the Code Alignment Working Group real quick. Their feedback is, obviously, this will add to the cost of housing. So noted. However, 3 of the 5 members of that Code Alignment Working Group are in the industry, and they said that this is less than 1% cost of the actual construction. So, and they were speaking more candidly that generally building permit fees are not what dictates the outcome of a project. It's more along the lines of interest rates. It's more along the lines of labor and material costs. These permit fees, if you see in your packet, are about 2.5% the cost of building. And again, that's for a $277,000 home, which doesn't exist. These fees are really, in our dollars, Durango dollars, about 1% the cost of construction. We're talking about a $7,000 building permit fee for a home. So these are relatively small, as characterized by our Code Alignment Working Group, and they were preparing staff for what the building community may say. So our next step, provided you would like staff to explore this, would be go and to do public engagement on a proposal to update our building permit fees based on 2023 valuations, which result in the $2,400 change, for example, for a single family home, $37,000 for multifamily. Keep in mind that multifamily home building was a $5 million build, which is really more like a $10 million build. And then $8,000 for commercial, which again is about a $1 million construction. So by comparison, these are small amounts. As I mentioned, we're 10 years out of date on our fees, and there is definitely plenty of context for keeping up to date with your fees. We see that with other departments. We see that with other jurisdictions. You see that more than I. And I think it's time. There's no perfect time to update fees, but this is not a bad time. We are strong in our development community. There's a graphic in your packet that shows, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, that we're generally keeping up in our construction industry. We're not at a particular downturn like we saw maybe in 2020. So next steps would be to, if provided you agree, we would share this information with our planning commission. And then we would do that public outreach, and we'd come back to you midsummer with the same proposal for a fee update.
Council?
Yes, I think that's a great idea. Now, I was wondering, since that's 10 years out, is there some way to work into these figures and for like the next adjustment fee, like keeping up with inflation or something, where we have continuous fees that raise, a few hundreds of percent every year. So we don't get stuck with major feed increases.
To make it more, yes, anticipated and then smaller increments. We're certainly open to that. You see that in utilities. The utility directors don't come to you every time they want to change fees. They just know what they need to do to keep up. So we could consider that as well.
Madam Mayor, sorry if I could, just looking at time and making sure we're respectful of that. Eva's topic is also related to this. So maybe just a few clarifying questions now and any initial feedback, and then want to make sure she has time to cover that too. But we deliberately package them together because they're both related to fees. So just a note.
Okay, but do you want council kind of feedback on this one issue?
Yeah,
Over here?
we did put it under information only.
Yeah,
So you're not approving anything right now.
Right,
We're just
correct.
providing you the information. We will take those next steps unless you say don't, I guess is.
But let's just get council feedback on this initial, if they have any. Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Bozeman. Do you, I guess, as the trifecta, do you feel like some of these fees could potentially railroad or de-incentivize building with costs being as high as they are, or any sort of, I guess, barriers to existing projects beyond just interest rates that are already kind of putting up their own roadblocks? Do you feel like you have more boots on the ground than I do? So do you feel like this could potentially be the straw that broke the camel back on some projects?
From what I gathered from the Code Alignment Working Group is they believe not.
Yeah.
That this is very small percentage, and the real factors that dictate a project happening or not are the larger.
Yeah. Labor.
The larger ones. That said, what we're trying to do here, and for the type of development we want to see more of, Eva would then speak to how we would incentivize certain development. So more specifically, waive these fees. And that would be, or offset these fees. Sorry. Offset. So that would be a way that we can make up.
And just to give you a sense of who on the Code Alignment Working Group is Tracy Reynolds, so the most prolific developer in the community who knows the economics very well. And he was kind of saying, it's not going to make or break a project. And we feel like Daniel articulated very well, a responsibility to keep it up to the costs of delivering the services that we are providing. Rick Feeney is also on there, an architect who's very active in the community, and Blake Fredrickson is another architect. So we did want that input from those people who do run these numbers regularly. Yep.
Great.
I have a couple of questions. So I understand the calculations that you provided, and that the construction cost in Durango is higher than what the ICC has in their document. It's not clear to me why we would be increasing fees though, based on that, just to increase fees because it's more expensive to construct in Durango is actually adding to their higher construction cost and the cost of living in Durango. When I looked at the ICC document, it uses the building and construction cost, but it really does a calculation based on the financial needs of the building department, and then the percentage of cost recovery. And if I look at the numbers in your package, the actual permits issued went down from 583 in 2018 to 400 in 2022. So if you look at purely what this is supposed to finance, which is the planning and the building department's processing of applications as well, you would almost think, why do we need more money instead of less? Because it's less permits issued. So me as one counselor, I would really like to see an analysis of all the revenues and expenses that you have in the community development, separated by each department in it, and see what does the building department really need, and what is the cost recovery that we want, and what would be the fee for permits, etc., need to be to make sure we meet that cost recovery according to the ICC. I personally think just saying it's more expensive to build here, therefore we're going to charge more for the permit is not necessarily justified.
We can provide that analysis.
Thank you.
The answer, thank you. I think that myself, I think it makes sense to look at testing fees after 10 years. I appreciate your explanation, your thorough description of what's behind it, and to me, it makes sense to look at it further. So I would support it.
Thank you.
I keep turning it off and then on, like opposite, so hope that it's okay for the recording.
Okay, well, with that, the other priority is affordable housing. So now we'll shift to packaging building permit fees with a proposed offset for projects that achieve our strategic plan goals.
Good afternoon, Eva Henson, Housing Innovation Manager. This has been a work in progress. I think I've really utilized the last year to incorporate projects, feedback from developers, our team, right? We have a lot of conversations about different types of housing products. And then of course, fair share, I think has been a big factor in the production of this policy before you in your packet this afternoon. The goal, expanding the current offset policy to a broader scope and standardizing the policy for housing developments that contain affordable and or workforce units or both in the city. And really wanted to make something innovative and unique, but also think about what's been the history, looking at some of those projects, looking at how the fee structure and informing sort of the product today. And I also wanted to think about long-term goals and what we're trying to achieve with our community goals and our strategic plan and our work plan and how all of those mesh together. And we've sort of as a collaborative team today put a lot of that before you. And one of the images that I'll end with will help, I think, show council kind of what we're trying to achieve readily, easily, hopefully. The product before you, of course, is a new affordable housing fee offset policy, expanding the broader product that the Fair Share Manual has in place and thinking about new development, preservation, and rehabilitation. So a much broader scope than just a fair share development, because that doesn't really exist in Durango right now. The only fair share development is Mountain Trace. The other component too that council is aware of is the city has contracted with Root Policy Research to undertake the Fair Share program. That project kicked off in March with reviewing and identifying program improvements for implementation, as well as a feasibility study. So that's already underway. As you're aware, we have a DOLA grant helping sort of cover most of those costs. And it's a big undertaking. Fair Share was implemented in 2009. And so this is really opening up that inclusionary zoning program and looking at methodology and other analysis for that. That's estimated to take about 7 months, which will include recommendations that will be coming back to council at a later time. This policy will explore and help set expectations, reduce cost barriers to development, support the production of a variety of housing types, while allowing the Housing Innovation Division to implement this now for near-term projects that are in the pipeline while Fair Share gets underway and will be utilized and implemented and adopted at a later time. Staff drafted 2 opportunities to expand the cost offsets to a broader scope that would offer fee really rebates. So the fee revenues would be collected similar to the ADU program. So again, how are we standardizing our product? How are we helping with transparency for development in coordination with other departments that would be impacted by this as well? So our messaging would be more clear. And again, with more efficiencies with review and other agreements and things that have to come into play for each of these to help standardize that as well, so we can replicate versus every project has a unique structure and cost offset. With this, we created a baseline and enhanced opportunity for developers that have mixed income projects. Public-private partnerships were a big factor into some of this thought process. Of course, keeping fair share in mind, meeting the 16% or voluntarily contributing at or below that. And in your packet kind of laid out that structure for what that would look like for the development as well as an enhanced where if they meet the 16% or voluntarily contribute more than that, I look at the 1500 Florida Road project and what we had the neighborhood meeting last night, right, where the expectation would be to deliver 50% of those units at affordable costs. So another good example where we're using firsthand projects to inform how this fee offset policy would look moving forward. Also something unique with council's feedback through the public-private partnerships and quarterly updates with Housing Matters was a bonus opportunity. This is something that will be unique for Durango. Not many communities at all have even looked at this. And this is another innovative way to think about how can we build quicker? How can we help incentivize projects that are meeting intangible outcomes that we want to achieve with our strategic and community goals by helping them with another bonus opportunity? Again, started with the baseline 1%, 2%. We can evaluate that. We could look at that. We could look at another opportunity to increase that if we wanted to with comments from council, but just wanted to have that as a starting point. So wanted to give council two really quick structures of what this would look like running it through the rubric of the policy. Using right now, this would be the 2013 fee structure. Again, didn't want to make any assumptions with any of that. So these fees kind of give you a first glance of what that would look like with the Gage Apartments. So this is a for-profit mixed income multifamily project. The development fee would be $1,000. Fair share currently was not applicable, but due to the circumstances with the Gage, with annexing in and some other things, we were able to capture those 14 rent restricted units. So they did meet the 16%. Building permit fees are calculated here, use tax as well, and proportionate to that 16%, they would be rebated. So they would pay the fees in whole and would be rebated $228,056.05. If we look at the bonus opportunity, if they pulled the building permit within 12 months, they would be eligible for that build quicker bonus opportunity. Oh. Is that right? Okay.
I think in the past, what we've done has just, we've been able to waive the building fee. So what Eva's done here is shown that the magnitude is a lot more substantial. If we include use tax here, it makes a bigger difference than what we've been able to do in the past few years, just under the existing approach. So
thank you.
Yeah.
That's right. I forgot we did that extra slide. Yeah. And so wanted to use an ownership opportunity project as well that helped inform the policy. If we looked at the Animas City Park Overlook townhomes, again, this is just an example using the rubric for this particular exercise for the fee offset policy. The development review fee for this particular project was $1,600. The fair share fee applied. So we had to adhere to that. So those fees would need to be paid in whole. Building permit fee, use tax, those fees would then highlight what would be achieved by the incentive policy for achieving, meeting the 16% or exceeding the 16% in this particular case, because it's the enhanced example. Therefore, the 2% bonus opportunity as well if they pulled the building permit within 12 months. What I wanted to also illustrate is both of these projects did pull the building permits within 12 months. So it also helped inform where we were coming from with this background for a policy. So it is achievable. I wanted to try and come up with something that was a bit more realistic. I don't want to make something that isn't going to be unachievable for developers. And so the Housing Illustrator image, we've used this a few times for council. We use this for DOLA as well. But this really encompasses, I think, a few things: collaboration, commitment, and where are we going with trying to achieve our goals. Daniel talked a little bit about processes and efficiencies. That's highlighted here as well. We've talked a little bit about public-private partnerships, but other partnership opportunities with infrastructure. I think about La Costa, I think about Three Springs. And then we want to think big picture too with the fee offsets. We also want to encompass Economic Development Alliance with our Catalyst Fund. How can we help get some of those costs covered with pre-development, but the housing fund isn't necessarily contributing to those quite yet because we don't know if the project's going to be viable. We don't know how feasible it is. So the Catalyst Fund really plays a key partner in this element to this image, but also we're still going to have the typical submittal. We're still going to have those projects that may or may not meet affordable and workforce housing goals, and that's okay. But maybe they can take advantage of some of those process efficiencies. Maybe they can take advantage of some of our online tools instead of having to do all of the paper trail. Maybe we can help on that customer service strategy, enhancing our communication and transparency. So I really wanted to, use this image to help council understand that this is really a mesh of a variety of resources. And it's not the only initiative that the city's looking at using for increasing our affordable housing inventory. This is another tool in a toolbox strategy, informing where we go from here. And with that, I'll kind of open it up to comments and feedback and thoughts on the affordable housing fee offset policy.
Yeah, I think, thank you for presenting that. I think it's very important that we stay on top of it, and what you've presented are tools to be used and can be used. And I think that's great. Just a couple of comments and a question here on the fee offsets in the different scenarios. It's a little bit, it's not very easy to compare all these pages and see which scenario falls under. That just might be a little easier option in a table format. But I think it's very good to continue formalizing these things and to make it sure that everybody gets the same treatment if they fall under that pathway. Since you related it to permit fees, I think it's really beneficial to have a simple and clear structure. So meaning the financing of any of these offsets ideally comes out of the housing fund and not necessarily paid for by permit fees, even though the permit fees want to be offset, but they're not going to be offset under the general community development or the general fund, but out of the housing fund. And that would make it very visible how much money we spent to address specifically affordable housing. And maybe even more importantly, how much money we'll need to make that program continue and be more successful. And you may have already planned on that, because on the form it says the fees paid would be reimbursed. Maybe you can just tell me out of which fund.
That was the objective and the goal, right? So we've had a couple scenarios, I would say at least one in particular, where the gauge came before you sort of after the fact with the project approval. We had to do a budget amendment. It was a little more intensive with having to then do the interfund transfer back and some other things. This will actually simplify that process. It will then allow those revenue streams to continue to come in so that those departments can budget accordingly, right? We don't want to sort of erode those away. And it also allows for that transparency so that I can actually, as our housing division, can track that. We can report it out and truly start to show what are those expenditures, what is the community benefit that was sort of from that. And also, again, budget accordingly so that we can start to really see if the program's been successful or not.
No, I think that's great.
Plan. Those fees come into the general fund, but the reimbursement
Out of the housing
Oh,
fund.
excellent. Yeah, thanks for.
and that money is appropriated. So we feel good about this policy. We're able to start implementing it tomorrow. We don't envision coming back for a resolution or anything. We can just go with this as the policy.
Great. One small comment still. I don't often see transfer fees as an option. And I really think that, I mean, we're here for 4 years or 2 4-year terms, but I think, and even for community development, transfer fees are a long-term option to fund housing. And I find it almost a missed opportunity if transfer fees are not offered to all larger developments. I know the implementation is relatively easy as soon as it's established through the title company and all that stuff. The tracking was easy, as you explained during the meeting we had on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's really part of this discussion, but as part of the broader topic, maybe that would be something that we can address as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other counselors?
I'm in support of the program. It's super exciting. It was great being in the RHA meeting and seeing how successful the Catalyst Fund first round was. And so that'll be good to see how, as it progresses and continues going through. So yes, I am in support of all this.
Yeah, it's great. I think it's hugely impactful to be able to move the needle on some affordable housing and rent restrictions and all of that. Yeah, thanks for all the hard work and presentation.
It looks wonderful. Just keep working hard at it.
And I support it as well. So there you have it. Thank you. Okay, council, we are maybe just gonna take a 5-minute break and reconvene at 3:45. Let's do that.
List of the boards and commissions that Melissa can approve, the ones that are the interviewed for. And like, so she can, when we go to approve them, she can like just go down and be like, okay, who was the interview team? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm actually gonna pull this list up on the screen as
Okay.
well and be able to type right on it while you guys are looking at it. So let me see if I can. Okay, this one. Boards and commissions pages.
I know. Well, that's what I was like. I have so many emails. I'm like, I don't even know where it is. I'm like, hopefully can help Melissa like get through it. They also know some of them like board of ethics. You're just gonna say, oh, no one interviewed. We're going back out. The current board of ethics members agreed to stay on for 3 months, right?
Yeah, there was actually one applicant. She was just in Florida
I don't
or
think she
whatever.
very
Yeah,
So you could, I know,
yeah.
we don't have to say that, but I just I feel like
Exactly.
we should go back out.
Yeah, so this one might help. Because it's got like who did the interviews and so, yeah, absolutely.
I'm just kidding. I'm just
You
kidding.
can have your very own to look at. How about that? And then
Okay.
these are the liaison appointments and the preferences.
Yeah, and we have a separate spreadsheet. That Melissa sent out for
Yeah.
that one, so that's good. And then the highlighted ones are the ones that got interviewed.
The highlighted ones are the ones that are, we're still short.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene. Sorry about that. I don't have my little gavel. But it is now almost 3:50, so this is good. I think we're kind of right on track. And now we're going to talk about Durango La Plata Airport Terminal Development Phase 1B Project Delivery Review with Tony Vicari.
Good afternoon, Council. Tony Vicari, Aviation Director at the Durango La Plata County Airport. That take a record for longest study session title?
Right.
Maybe. All right, well, I'll keep this relatively concise. So I'm here to provide the council with a general update on the development program for the terminal facilities at the Durango Airport. First half of the presentation I'll move through relatively swiftly. It's just that, largely an update on where we stand, making sure everyone's familiar with the scope of the project, various phases, and what logistically is moving forward at the airport. And I'll spend a little more time on the back half of the presentation talking specifically about the delivery of Phase 1B, which is the larger of the two phases of development, obviously carries a larger price tag and has more implications relative to the finances of the airport. And the reason this is a direction I needed item on today's agenda is to gain concurrence from the council on the proposed financing plan for the airport. There's obviously not any financial documents being presented today. Those would be at a future regular council meeting, but we want to gain concurrence with our proposed direction relative to the anticipated financing associated with Phase 1B of the project. So with that, we'll just jump in real quick here. So just very high level context, I think as most of the council is aware, the airport has grown over the years. Here you can see a chart of the last 20 years of enplaned airline traffic at the airport. We've seen a doubling of overall traffic. The bulk of that growth was between about 2003 and 2014. We saw a bit of a plateau that happened in the 2010s. Obviously, the severe decline in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the extreme recovery in 2021, followed by a slight settling in 2022. But looking at it as a whole and throwing out the outliers, overall, the big takeaway here is that traffic has doubled at the airport since 2000. And really what that means in terms of terminal facilities is the existing terminal was constructed in 1988, obviously well before that graph we watched or just looked at. So in that time frame, our traffic has more than doubled, but the terminal facilities have changed very little. In 2019, we expanded some of our behind the scenes back of house airline baggage makeup type of operating space. But other than that, the only substantial change we've made to the terminal has been the installation of a temporary tent structure where the American Airlines boarding gates are currently located. However, that temporary structure was built in 2013, which don't look now is a decade ago. And all of a sudden temporary becomes permanent, which is fine in many contexts. The tent and the American Airlines boarding gates are holding up remarkably well. It's a good facility for us. However, strategically as an airport or really any facility, we can't rely on a temporary structure to be a long-term piece of our infrastructure. If that tent were to fail today, for anyone who's familiar with the terminal, we could not exist. If you took the entire American airline operation and tried to smash it in next to United in the small area, beyond the TSA screening checkpoint, the airport could not function in the way it does today. So one of the most important things I like to talk about when we talk about this project is framing it in the sense of this isn't necessarily a massive expansion project. A large part of our goal here is just to backfill the existing square footage we already have today with that tent structure, but in a permanent infrastructure that's going to serve this community over the long haul. In addition to that, of course, we need to make sure we're reacting to an evolving airline industry. We're seeing more and more upgauging, which is simply the utilization of larger aircraft. We're seeing that play out in our market. United is now offering one daily flight on an Airbus A319, which is a 126-seat aircraft. That's more than double the size of the aircraft that we saw in our market commonly about a decade ago, which was more in the line of a 50-seat regional jet. We're seeing that become more and more the commonplace delivery method for airlines across the country, and regional airports around the country are actually losing air service, not gaining it. And it's in part because of some real constraints that exist on the regional carriers in this country. So we need to make sure that our market can respond to those changing economic conditions. And part of that is making sure the facilities can handle bigger loads of passengers. Even if our gross passenger numbers don't change dramatically, we're seeing them come in bigger and bigger waves at one time. So that means we need to have boarding gates that can support that, as well as the other locations throughout the terminal that can support that kind of activity. I think most are familiar with the existing terminal. We'll just kind of put that up as context. There's a couple of key pressure areas. One of the major limitations we have, as I mentioned already, is boarding gate space. So the available square footage post TSA checkpoint is really quite limited. It's essentially the tent we talked about earlier and the existing United Airlines boarding gate, with the rest of the space being largely dominated by the TSA screening checkpoint. So here you can see the long-term vision for expansion of the terminal. This was formally adopted in 2020 after a terminal area plan to review and revise the long-term development strategy for the airport. The whole intention of that TAP, the terminal area plan, was to provide for a mechanism to move forward with incremental development of the terminal facilities. So what you see here is just that. It's a long-term vision. This is not contemplated to be an immediate build. In reality, this is probably a 20+ year vision for what the terminal complex will look like as we continue to grow and expand. For context, you can see the heavyset red line outlines the existing facilities. So that's today's infrastructure, and everything essentially to the right or north of that line would be new build into the future. So when we break that down into phases, the first phase of proposed development is no longer proposed, it's in action. Phase 1A of this project formally broke ground about 3 weeks ago in late April, and we're excited to move forward with that. So this project adds 1 airline boarding gate and hold room space, new public restrooms, concessions, as well as a rehabilitation of some interior space to add additional family restrooms, nursing room, and additional storage space for the airport. So this is really the best way to think about phase 1A is a smaller targeted enabling project for us. Some other behind the scenes pieces to this, we're actually doing a lot of back-end electrical work to move the primary electrical services for the airport, switching them around to the other side of the airport to basically get them out of the way of future construction phases here, adding a new backup emergency generator to the terminal to replace an original 1988 emergency generator. So a lot of back of house utility work that's serving as an enabling project to launch us into the much larger proposed phase, which is phase 1B. And this is really the crux of the overall project for us here. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. If you look at the diagram, you can see the blue purplish type color is new construction, whereas the darker red, it would be heavy renovation of existing spaces, and the sort of lighter salmon color would be just lighter finish upgrades within existing spaces. So won't walk through this piece by piece, but the major pieces to focus here is the moving of the TSA screening checkpoint. So the TSA is really the kind of fulcrum of any airport in the modern day. It's obviously the pinch point that restricts the flow between the unsecured land side of the airport to the secured air side. Currently that exists in a central corridor in the middle of our building, which creates a tight constraint at the airport. And in this project, we're going to move that into new build on the north end of the terminal, which you can see in the blue on the kind of far right of the diagram there. This resets the whole flow of the building and allows for a center point to be shifted there. We'll also be building 1 additional airline boarding gate, new full post-screening concessions, food and beverage concessions. We currently offer very limited concessions and only in the American Airlines tent. We just don't have the infrastructure nor the square footage to really support a substantial concession presence post-screening, but we're intending to right-size that in phase 1B and really flip the profile where our food and beverage concessions are primarily after the screening checkpoint instead of before. Right now, that square footage is actually reversed, but that's in defiance of actual sort of demand trends. Right now, about 75% of the revenue from food and beverage concessions at the airport is driven after the screening checkpoint. People want to move through the checkpoint and then spend any of their dwell time there after they've already cleared through the security screening process. And so we have a kind of an opposing forces situation where most of our square footage now is pre-screening, but very little of the revenue generation is there, and then vice versa on the other side. So we're going to rectify that in phase 1B here. We'll have to build an all new baggage claim area, which is being moved from its current location, which will be taken over by TSA queuing, and then some rehabilitation and complete build out of new public restrooms on the land side, new concessions on the land side as well. So really a major overhaul of the airport. And what this does as an end deliverable for us is puts us in a place where we feel like would be well positioned to do all the things we talk about at the onset of this conversation, which is to serve the modern airline industry, have right-sized boarding gates that can serve mainline aircraft through the evolving market needs there, really have 4 significant airline gates that allow us to grow as we see shifts in our markets. So inevitably, when we get additional successes on the air service front and are able to recruit additional airlines into the market, that we have a turnkey operation for them to be able to move into instead of a constrained operation on that front. And then also, as you can see in the diagram here, the tent still exists on the sort of lower left corner there. When we're done with phase 1B, we then have a strategic opportunity to look at where we are at that point in time, what demands are in the market and what the condition of that facility is. But ideally, when we close this, we'll be in the position to either decommission and remove that infrastructure and move on from it. Or if it remains in good shape, we can keep it as flex space until such time where it's either its condition dictates it be removed or it has a need in the market effectively. So it puts us in the position of not being behind, but being ahead. So that space becomes flex space for us, but not something we're reliant on to run the core operation and would be in a challenging position if it were compromised in some fashion. That was just a zoom in of that. And so a couple of quick renderings before I start getting into more of the nuts and bolts. Bear in mind, these are not fully designed yet. Phase 1A is complete with design and under construction, but we have very recently started phase 1B. So full materiality type of decisions have not yet been made. So just overall project timeline, phase 1A design is complete. I mentioned phase 1A construction is now underway. We anticipate that being wrapped up in the first quarter of 2024. So a little under a year from now. Phase 1B formally kicked off about a month ago, and we're now officially underway on the design side. We anticipate completing that near the year end or first quarter of 2024. And our goal is to move towards construction of phase 1B in the summer of 2024. That's predicated by a number of factors. One is taking advantage of an existing mobilized construction general contractor on the project that can potentially move from phase 1A right into phase 1B with perhaps only just a short pause between the two phases, but is really predicated by the availability of federal grant funding through the FAA that we're anticipating be available in the 2024 funding cycle. So to that end, project funding, I think the question that most people are interested in understanding here. So I think the council is aware, but it's very good to make sure we iterate to the public. The airport operates as an enterprise fund of the city of Durango, meaning that we do not use any local taxpayer dollars for operations or capital projects at the airport. The airport is fully self-sustaining and funding through the operating revenues and grant revenues we derive through state and federal sources on that front. So I think it's important context for the community to be aware of when we look at this. As I mentioned earlier, this whole entire terminal expansion program is really driven by the intent of this project being executed and funded in an incremental manner through airport revenue streams. I think most of the council is probably familiar. In 2016, a ballot question did go to the public seeking taxpayer funding to support a property tax mill levy that was supporting a prior iteration of terminal development at the airport. That was a big swing project that was looking at the construction of a completely new terminal facility, but there wasn't public support for that at the end of the day. And I don't think it was because there wasn't support for airport development. Rather, there was just not a prioritization by the community for that to be a taxpayer funded endeavor. So we heard that information, came back and ultimately revised our strategy to present what we have today, which is this incremental development strategy, which we can bite off in sizable pieces in a way that we can fund through our available revenue streams without impacting the taxpayers of Durango or La Plata County. So when you look at the funding breakdown here, you can see the rows are the phase 1A design and construction, and then phase 1B design and construction across the board. I won't go through every piece here, but the bottom line impact is that we're leveraging significant federal funding for this project. If you break out the specific areas, we're looking at about 65% of the overall project costs for both phase 1A and 1B being eligible for FAA grants, both through the standard airport improvement program grant funding, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed recently and that the airport has access to as well. There's a small amount of state funding associated with the project, about just over $600,000. And then the remainder, about 33% of the overall project costs, or about $12 million, is airport funding on that front. We have cash funded all the work to date. So that would consist of the phase 1A design and our portion of the phase 1A construction. And we're also cash funding phase 1B design. And so really the last remaining piece here from an airport funding component is the construction costs associated with phase 1B, which we're intending to finance. The airport isn't in the cash position to outlay $8 million on phase 1B construction, but we do feel like we're well positioned to be able to finance that, which is what the remainder of this conversation will focus on. So just pause because now it's kind of transitioning into that financing discussion. Any questions so far?
Now, I just want to restate how impressed I am with the amount of project, 36 million, that you're going to be able to do with $11, $12 million. So just a little compliment on this sheet here.
Thank you. No, we're really excited to be able to move on that project. It's a unique point in time where we have access to some federal grant funding streams that weren't previously available, particularly through the bipartisan infrastructure law, is providing a little bit of additional funding that we didn't previously anticipate. And we're finding that we're well positioned to be able to be very competitive to the point where we've already secured $3.5 million in bill funds to support phase 1A, and we'll continue to submit, even in and above what we're depicting here to sort of increase that federal eligibility. So jumping into the meat of the discussion here, just want to talk through the financing considerations. So a couple of core pieces here, of course, just looking at the actual mechanism and process for financing for the airport. So I'll talk briefly about some legal analysis of what debt issuance for the airport can look like, and then also talk about financing instruments. Talk a little bit about airport rates and charges and our competitive positioning. So I mentioned, as we know, the airport's a self-sustaining fund, which means we have to assess rates and charges that can support our expense levels. And obviously those expense levels will change if we incur some significant financing costs. So I'll speak a little bit about our competitive positioning and how we see our rate structures potentially evolving through that. Risk assessment, as we know, we're in an evolving interest rate environment currently. However, our general reading of the situation is that our peak exposure probably exists today effectively, with perhaps a leveling off of potential exposure to ongoing interest rate increases over the next year. We are looking at potentially locking in, an actual financial close for this in roughly the second quarter of 2024 prior to construction. So we're still about 10 months or so out from when we would actually be bringing forward a true financing mechanism for council, actual vote and approval effectively. So hopefully no one can control the interest rate environment, of course, but we think we might be in a position where we've at least gone through the bulk of the increases in the interest rate environment. And much the same on the construction cost side. We're obviously seeing rapid increases throughout the market, but we're starting to see some leveling off of material and supply costs, and feel like over the next year, we hopefully are insulated ourselves from any major changes on that front. And then involved parties here, that have been involved in this discussion on the financing side in particular, involves, of course, legal, both on city and county attorneys have been involved in the process. Bond counsel, the city has specific bond counsel that has been pulled into this to provide advisement, airport staff, FAA, CDOT, city, county, pretty wide ranging group here. So jumping right into the legal analysis side, walk through the parties there that have helped us to arrive at this. And so really what this is a review of Tabor and the city charter to ensure that we understand the financing capacity and capability of the airport within the purview of those two guiding documents. And really the upshot is that second bullet point there, which is that our formal legal advisement, which combines bond counsel, city and county legal offices, are that the Airport Enterprise Fund may issue debt backed solely by airport revenues without a ballot initiative on that front. Tabor and the city charter are different animals on that front, and I won't claim to be the lawyer in the room necessarily, but Tabor really has key provisions that provide that enterprise funds are exempt from Tabor, provided that the state and local funding associated with the enterprise funds makes up less than 10% of their overall revenues. And that is definitively the case for the airport. Therefore, the Tabor allocations relative to the airport enterprise fund are waived essentially, and not impactful in this sense. The city charter does have some further limiting language around financing on that front, but really the key upshot of that is Article 5, Section 22, if you prefer to read through the specifics of the city charter, which allows the city council by ordinance without an election and without adherence referencing a prior section here, but basically it allows for securities made payable solely from revenues derived from the operation of a project or capital improvement to proceed forward without any kind of vote of the public effectively. So in the case of the Airport Enterprise Fund, whereby the revenues generated by this project, which are the revenue producing aspects of the terminal, which in and of itself is a leasing instrument that allows the airport to derive the preponderance of its revenues. Basically, it's saying that the revenues generated by the airport are not city and county general fund revenues. They are restricted revenues that can only stay within the Airport Enterprise Fund. There are federal laws prohibiting the diversion of revenue away from airports. That's a restriction on every grant the airport signs. And so therefore, all the revenues derived by the Airport Enterprise Fund are just that, airport revenues, not general fund revenues. So no obligations of any city nor county general revenues would be required through any kind of financing issuance on that front. And so our legal advisement has been that we can proceed forward with a clean financial or financing issuance without needing to seek a vote of the public. When I say that, I'm not saying that the airport is, of course, not trying to avoid any sort of input from the public on that front, but rather just to say that we have a clean path forward to just issue the financing in a way that's consistent with all of our legal advisement, and will save a significant amount of time that would be required to provide an educational campaign to the public associated with a ballot question effectively.
Can I ask a clarifying question? The grants are very low here, so I assume that the project grants are not included in the grants that are referred to here.
Correct. Yeah, this is just referencing 2023, which would be the reference year prior to 2024. That would be a respective. You're totally correct that in 2024, per the prior slide, we would anticipate some additional state revenues to come in as a matching grants effectively on the project. However, those would still not come anywhere close to exceeding the 10% test on that front, since they're far dwarfed by the federal grants associated with them. So since our state grants are typically issued at about 4% of project costs, that's really the max that we could ever get, unless there was some sort of very odd state local grant only that we have not historically seen. Yep. So with that, jumping into some financing options, we've looked at a variety of options here. Those include general airport revenue bonds, state infrastructure bank loans, lease purchase agreements, and bank loans. You can see the full pro-con list here in the table on that front. And really what we've identified with both the Airport Commission as well as city, county legal team, financial advisors, et cetera, is most of our focus is narrowed in on the state infrastructure bank loan program. And I have a little more information on this on the next slide here. So the SIB program is something that's administered by CDOT, and in particular CDOT Aeronautics. It's a division of CDOT that most aren't familiar with because obviously they only work in the space of airports. And that specific program has been in place for a number of years. We've never used it at the Durango-La Plata County Airport, but a number of airports around the state have accessed this. It's basically a revolving loan fund that the state provides at a strategically low interest rate for eligible infrastructure projects on that front. And so the SIB program on the aeronautics level has been basically locked up in terms of its financing capacity for a long time. It was fully obligated through existing requests that were out there. However, in the fall of 2022, the CDOT Aeronautics went through a recapitalization and added a significant amount of funding to the SIB program because they knew they had demand around the state to provide these revolving low interest loans for airport projects. And so now they're in the position to consider additional applications on that front. And the benefits this brings to the airport is that first and foremost, it's a low interest loan. They're strategically placed themselves at and below market in terms of interest rates. They also offer extremely competitive origination fee schedules. The origination fee on the proposed loan we're talking about here is as low as $20,000 on an $8 million loan request, which is minuscule in the market. When we compare that against placement rates for general airport revenue bonds, we're talking about massive differentials in terms of the upfront borrowing cost. One of the limitations to be aware of, however, on the SIB program is it does have a maximum 10-year borrowing term associated with it. So given the fact that it is a lower less duration borrowing term, we're not looking at a 20 or 30-year placement. That does create a slightly higher annual borrowing cost, which I'll talk about in a minute. But overall, we feel like the benefits of this program continue to be the positive direction for the airport to really zero in on. So talking about financials a little bit here, you can see just a quick side-by-side on the green column there, it's a state infrastructure bank loan. And just as a comparison, under the tan column is a general airport revenue bond on that front. In both cases, we're looking at about an $8 million bond proceed or loan proceed effectively to be raised by the project. You can see one of the key differentials, of course, is the interest rate. We're projecting a 4.5% interest rate on the state infrastructure bank loan and a 6% interest rate on the general airport revenue bond. Those are probably conservative in both cases. Right now, the SIB program, despite national interest rates, is actually loaning at 3.5% today. On that front, they will be updating that in June. I expect it to uptick slightly, but the 4.5% was been provided to us to the state as something they feel is pretty conservative, and we might actually end up lower than that. But we wanted to model it out at a higher rate, of course. Conversely, on the general airport revenue bond, 6% might be a little bit low potentially. The placement rate could end up being slightly higher than that. You can see the differential terms in 10 and 20 years here. And then really the key differentials here, of course, the issuance amount, the origination fees and placement costs associated with a revenue bond are substantial. So you're talking about a $900,000 difference right from the get-go in terms of the overall issuance amount required to cover the debt. And then the end of the day debt service number is just over $1 million on the state infrastructure bank loan program and a little over $750,000 on that comparison on the general airport revenue bond. Getting a little bit in the weeds here, but about how does the airport intend to pay that debt service? It's an important question, of course. You can see the breakdown, those two lines, those rows, it says paid by PFC and paid by rates. PFC is passenger facility charges. So these are surcharges that are collected by the airlines. When you buy a ticket out of any airport in the country, it's a $4.50 surcharge. The airlines collect those and remit them back to the airport where it was collected from, whatever the base origination was off of a ticket effectively. So currently DRO generates about $750,000 a year in PFC funds on that front. And so we're looking to allocate a large portion of our PFCs to support the debt service for this program. The reason it's not the full 750,000 is it's limited by some eligibility percentages, but we're basically going to max out and use as much of our PFCs as practical to pay for the debt service. So if we do that, you can see that's just under $600,000 a year on the SIB program coverage, which leaves a delta of a little over $400,000 a year that we would have to pay for out of rates. So that just means that it has to be paid for out of the unrestricted revenues of the airport in some form or fashion. Rate structure, of course, the airport can set rates across the board, whether we're talking about airline rates, parking rates, rental rates, fuel surcharge rates. There's a whole litany of rates and charges the airport assesses across the spectrum on that front. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The numbers below that sort of hypothesize what would it look like if we passed along every cent of the additional cost here to the airlines effectively and increased our rates for the airlines to operate in the environment on that front. So I'll chat a little bit about what that looks like. So this is the competitive positioning side here. So what you're looking at here is a chart of CPE, which is cost per enplanement. This is not a fee we assess, but sort of a boiling down of the overall fee structure we assess to the airline. So if you take all the terminal rent and landing fees we assess to the airlines and just divide it by the number of passengers, it gives you a cost per enplaned passenger. Essentially, what is the airline at the end of the day paying the airport for its operations on that front? It's a measure we use across the industry to level set between airports and look at basically how expensive is any given airport for an airline to operate at. And so here you can see these are airports across the state of Colorado. The two orange columns are Durango, both our current 2023 today's CPE, and then what that would look like in 2024 if we were to essentially pass along the cost of this financing to the airlines, which would be about a little over a $2 CPE increase for us. And so when you look at the other comparisons across the state, there's obviously a few that jump off the page as expensive airports to operate in, Aspen, Eagle Vale, Hayden, which is Steamboat Springs. But when you compare us out to the rest of the airports, such as Grand Junction, Montrose, you see that we are actually at and below industry standards in the state of Colorado, even with a $2 increase if we were to make the decision to pass off every cent of the project through our airline rates and charges. So really under the most aggressive scenario in which we say we're willing to pass along all the costs of the project through our airline rates, we remain hyper competitive within the overall industry comp set here on that front. And when we widen that out a little bit, this is a non-Colorado look. So this is looking at regional airports around the Mountain West for the most part in the Western US. So there are a few outliers in the Colorado markets. We generally don't comp ourselves to Aspen and Steamboat and Eagle Vale. They are definitively different types of operations than us. So we want to make sure we're looking at that wider set to ensure that we're competitive across a wider set of airports. So again, you can see the Durango current versus potential proposed in 2024 offset against against a pretty wide variety of airports across the Mountain West and in Western US. And again, not quite as big of outliers as you saw in the state of Colorado, but even with that adjustment, we'd be well within a normalized range in terms of our airline costs across the board. The other thing to keep in mind here is that all those blue bars are 2021 figures, because that's the last year of reportable data that we have from the FAA on each of these individual airports. And I'm comparing them to 2024 Durango rates. We're not the only airport in the country that's seeing costs increase for projects, inflation, you have it. So in reality, this is again, probably the worst case scenario. You're going to see all those other bars uptick as well, because there's no airport I know of that's decreasing its CPE over time. Everyone's having to match inflation on that front. So really what I present these two slides to show is that we have options in terms of how the airport chooses to set its rates to cover this proposed debt service. And we haven't made those decisions. We don't have to make those decisions just yet. But if we choose to make the simple decision, which is just to pass it along to our airline rates, we're still extremely competitive within our comp set, both in-state and within the greater region. And I think it's an important context to provide out. If you talk to an airline real estate rep, they'll yell and tell you that this is an egregious increase. However, these are the type of slides that we point back to and say that we are extremely competitive within the market on that front. And when we also talk about, what does this mean for our consumer, right? So airfares in a regional market are not going to be as cheap as we know they are in Albuquerque or Denver. Those are our competitors. However, when we talk CPE, cost per enplanement, a $2 increase, if they were to pass every dollar to the consumer, means $2 per flight. So we're not talking about some sort of gross massive impact to the users of the Durango Airport if that cost inevitably just flows down to the end consumer. So to kind of run this through the finish line here a little bit, there's a lot going on here, so bear with me. I'll try to simplify this. So these are a couple of financial models looking at long-term financial position of the airport on this front. So these were requests of the Airport Commission for us to look at, and we've reviewed these all with the Airport Commission. And so they wanted to see a couple of scenarios run out to say, what does this really mean? If we're going to take on a significant debt service to support phase 1B of the terminal, what's our long-term positioning for the airport? So the first off here is what I call the baseline scenario. So this is assuming just that we take out this $8 million SIB loan in 2024, and we have that $1 million debt service payment for a 10-year period. We choose to pass along a $2 CPE increase to our airlines in 2024. And after that, just have 3% airline rate increases on an annualized basis to match inflation. We're projecting 1.9% annualized passenger traffic growth, so relatively subdued passenger traffic growth. So we're not banking on substantial gains to be made in terms of traffic to really drive the revenues of the airport. 3% annualized revenue growth for the rest of our non-parking and airline moves. This actually contemplates no changes to airport parking rates for public vehicle parking, and then a 3.5% annualized expense growth rate. So boil that all down, and you can see all the columns there. So the blue column is unrestricted cash for the airport, so unrestricted reserves. The red column is our PFCs, which is our passenger facility charges. Those are specific surcharges I explained earlier, but they can only be used for specific FAA-approved projects. And then the green is our rental car surcharge dollars, which is similar, but can only be used for rental car projects like wash bays and parking lots and counters and so on and so forth. So when you look at the long-term projection here under this baseline scenario, the synopsis is that the airport fund remains in extremely strong financial position. At its lowest, our unrestricted reserves would settle to about 100% of operating expenses in 2027 at sort of our peak expenditure level as we work through the debt service. And then they actually increase from there as we start to kind of clear out of the peak portion of our capital program overall. And then our PFC and CFC funds are very healthy. So it really shows you that the baseline scenario is a very strong one for us. And then we just compare that against a couple more scenarios. This one is the parking rate increase scenario. So this is the sort of financial upside scenario, essentially. So basically all the same assumptions, but we make $1 a day parking increases in 2024 and 2027 to support landside improvements as well as this project. And it puts us in an even stronger position whereby the unrestricted reserves remain well above 100% of operating expenses and actually grow to more than double our operating expenses by 2033. So the airport would have a lot of capacity to really continue to be aggressive with its capital program. Or if we look at it a different way, we'd potentially have the opportunity to be a little less aggressive in terms of our airline rate structure, try to maintain a hyper competitiveness in terms of how we choose to assess those rates. If we choose to increase parking rates, we don't have to be as aggressive with our airline rates or vice versa. So we have some options to consider here on that front. Again, another option the Airport Commission asked us to look at was increased staffing as the airport grows. Employee staffing is going to continue to be something that we need to take a look at and put a real eyes on. So this is looking at a number of 3 additional FTEs added between 2024 and 2027 to look at what that does for operating costs. And yet again, we see that we settling down to about 82% of operating expenses in 28, but again, climb back above north of 100% by 2035. So very strong financial positioning for the airport on that front. And then last but not least, the worst case scenario, never the fun one to look at, but always smart to do so, is an airline exit. So basically some sort of market condition would populate and essentially one of the 2 airlines flying into Durango today were to leave the market effectively. In that scenario, we contemplate that we'd see about a 32% decrease in overall traffic in that initial year. And then it would take about 5 to 6 years to fully recover back to the prior baseline as we saw an infill either from whoever the incumbent was or other competitive airlines that decided to enter the market. I have no reason to think this will be the case, and certainly not something we would want to entertain, but smart to look at on that front. And really the key thing here the Airport Commission wanted us to look at is, how survivable is that? A major traumatic impact to our finances effectively when we're at our peak exposure, because we just have taken on a significant debt service effectively. And so the synopsis here is that obviously it puts us in a more compromised position because we see a pretty significant decrease in revenue with that drop of passenger traffic. However, the good news is even in that scenario, at worst, our unrestricted reserves dip to right around 50% of operating expenses moving forward, which is actually what our reserve policy states. We have a minimum of 50% of operating expenses is the reserve policy of the airport, which is, I believe, more aggressive than almost every, or more conservative, I suppose, than almost any fund in the city. We've just given the sheer amount of infrastructure we maintain at the airport, we've maintained a minimum operating reserve that's pretty healthy on that front. So even in this worst case scenario, we recognize that we can keep the airport solvent. We can cover the debt service in this situation throughout. We do have limited capacity. We would certainly in that scenario have to be pretty aggressive about trimming back the ancillary aspect capital program and really pull back in a lot of areas if that played out in reality, but it is very much a survivable incident and something it's not going to push the airport into some sort of an insolvency type of event. So to wrap it all up, this is the kind of financial timeline and next steps. So we've sort of gone through all the information gathering, back end legal analysis of the financial issuance capacity for the airport, established our preliminary project budget. A PFC application is already in progress with the FAA to support this project. All of our financial analysis is kind of being constantly updated as we go through different levels of design on the project and have changes in the airport environment. And now we're into this period here where looking for concurrence from council on this proposed direction to make sure that you feel comfortable with us moving forward to potentially bring an actual financing proposal and instrument back, like I said, likely in the first or second quarter of 2024. And again, right now looking at an SIB loan issuance is our most likely deliverable on that front. Between now and then, we'd be establishing our 2024 rates and charges this fall. That'll be part of our budget process. We go through an annual setting of our rates. That'll be largely informed by significant discussions with the Airport Commission around strategy. Again, what do we pick here? Do we put the burden of this project more on the airlines, more on airport parkers, or some variation of those? And those are decisions that we'll be making in the upcoming months. We'll formalize an SIB loan application this fall. And then if all goes to plan in early 2024, we'd be finalizing the supporting FAA grants for this project, getting our guaranteed maximum price for construction from our general contractor, which is Nunn Construction. The entity that's building phase 1A for us was also brought on board to carry through on the project of phase 1B and be a consistent partner. Closing on whatever the financial agreements are, and then ultimately going to construction in summer of 2024. So I will pause and hear any questions or possible consensus.
Great thoughts from council.
I'll just start. Tony brought this to the Airport Commission in January was the first time we talked about it, I think. And so the Airport Commission has had, 4 meetings. Not all of them have been super heavy with this, but a lot. So we've seen probably 10 times the tables and graphs that you just saw. Because the data that Tony brings to us is all, just like this, just so concise and great and to the point. Really dug into, the GARB, the SIB, the bank loans, the positives and negatives, really talking about the best flexibility for growth and maintenance and staffing. They have great questions for Tony, and we've thought about, or Tony's thought about all of this stuff, you know, who should pay for it? Should it be parking rate? Should it be the airlines through CPE? And then also lots of discussion around risk and and like the best opportunity for funding. And so, you know, just always thank you to Tony for your, you know, preparedness. Is that a word? Yeah. And I just want council to know that it's been not like lots of discussions with the airport commission with this. So.
And support. And
Yes, support for
full
this,
support.
full support. Yeah, it's always, I feel like unanimous. I mean, always follow, you know, great discussions, but yes, yeah.
Excellent.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you. Other counselors?
I'd like to say thank you because I can remember riding the prop airport planes to Denver. There's a and everybody would move, you know, inside to shift. No, really. I think this is excellent, your plan, just hearing it first off. And I'm wondering when you have the exit strategy in case one one company doesn't want to continue with service to Durango Airport. Is that similar to, say, if we had another instance like COVID, a national emergency, or?
It would be different than that. In the sense of COVID, we had some federal support that came down throughout the country, of course, that did result in some COVID relief funds that came to the airport and all airports across the country, just given the calamitous impact that we saw with a 50% reduction in passenger traffic. In the instance of an exit, like an airline exit that was market specific, generally we wouldn't expect to see any sort of federal support. So that's something we need to be prepared to self-sustain in the instance that were to come to fruition. Yeah, I have no reason to think that. I wouldn't propose, you know, this kind of development project if we felt like we were on the fence with one of our carriers, or if the market couldn't support the kind of air service it has on that front. But really, that's most of that just comes to financial planning to ensure that even if we are to incur, you know, a significant amount of debt service and move forward with this large project commitment, that we can sustain the operation even in the worst case scenario, which we feel like we've modeled out pretty well and could manage. Wouldn't be comfortable, it wouldn't be a fun process, but it's something that we could manage, we feel like. On the flip side, what we don't want to do is miss the opportunity here to take advantage of $20+ million in federal grant funding and potentially leave ourselves in a compromised position where we really just can't accommodate the evolving airline industry. And we see, you know, the economic impact of the airline industry really sort of pass Durango by in that kind of sense. And that's sort of the downside scenario that we really want to avoid with just maintaining the current facilities and not having a plan to replace temporary tents and such structures.
I thank you for the presentation and going over the whole package here. And just my position, it seems obvious that the SIB loan, because this is where you want direction, is the best option. I certainly like the lowest cost part of that, even though it's a higher cost on an annual basis. The total cost is a lot less. Did it ever go to the SALFAB for the long-term financing part that they tend to do? And what role is the county, or where are and how, what point is the county on this discussion?
Good question. So the first one, no, it did not go to the SALFAB. It stayed solely with the Airport Commission, and then with the council. We've also been to joint city council BOCC meetings as well to keep them updated. And then on the county side, just that we've had joint BOCC meetings. I meet with the BOCC on a quarterly basis, and this is usually the #1 topic of discussion. So I feel like they're well positioned. Commissioner Salka sits on the Airport Commission and has regular insight into all the monthly conversations that are getting far deeper into this conversation. And then county legal has also been pretty deeply involved in the financing discussion over the last 6 months, basically, and involved in all of our calls. So they've tracked along quite closely and understand what the implications are, since they are co-owners, of course, of the airport, and want to understand what those mechanisms look like, because they have some impact on the county as well.
But I appreciate all of this. I just wonder, is it worthwhile, because this is a lot of information and you have a lot of small things that we don't know about or are not visible, and went through the whole discussion process. And even though it seems like a very obvious, better choice, is it worthwhile to have SALFAB look at it at least and say, that's absolutely right?
So I would say, just to respond to that, two of the commissioners, the airport commissioners actually sit on SaltFab. So you do have some cross there. And because it's airport specific, there's so many airport specific funding that SaltFab doesn't have a background in terms of like financing options. And so I would just say from my personal, I said on both, that I think that there would be no change and just a delay in time from what Tony has presented.
Can you explain a little bit on the $8 million loan on that part? Is that something that's not so much normal standard financing options? I know about the other ones, but on the 8 million amount, is that not just typical? Or is there?
I mean, to some degree, it's standard financing on in terms of the sheer financing mechanism. Yeah, like the state SIB program isn't going to be substantially different from a bank loan or any such programs other than just the nuts and bolts like interest rate and origination fees and such. So you're correct. There's nothing that's, sort of super aviation centric in that sense. Most of the aviation specific pieces I think that Councilor Beal would be a reference to are more like the capacity to split the resulting cost between PFC charges and unrestricted reserves at the airport and sort of what that breakdown looks like. So I think it's really more on the payment of the debt service effectively is where the airport specific financials really come into play, as opposed to the financing instrument itself. The instrument itself is probably not so aviation centric.
Again, so if I would give as one person direction, I think it's great. I would suggest you move forward. But I wouldn't mind having that SaltFab feedback on the instrument, not so much on the fee structure, just as an extra checkpoint for us. We're talking about a big 10-year loan.
Thank you, Councillor Bosman's. Other councillors' thoughts? You already provided yours.
So Tony, am I right in understanding that the tent more permanent tent solution is not part of this phase, correct?
Yes, correct. So the tent is going to be with us for a while. Really, it's not until the completion of phase 1B that we have enough square footage to be able to decommission it. So it's going to be with us until we complete phase 1B, at which point we have the decision to either decommission it, mothball it, or continue using it depending on circumstances.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was wondering, are we going to make a more permanent solution to increase capacity, or is that more?
Yeah, no. So the resulting square footage that we'll have post 1B, even if we take the tent off the board, is going to be about a 35% increase of what we have today. So we're definitively adding capacity. We're going to have 4 fully sized mainline aircraft capable airline gates, whereas today we have essentially 2. So we'll be, more or less doubling our true gate capacity effectively out of that. And that's not even including the tent. If the tent were to stick around and we thought it was still in good shape, then we're in an even stronger position. As I mentioned, this is phase 1A and phase 1B are part of an even bigger long-term vision. And so there's actual additional plans in our terminal area plan that shows how we can continue to ultimately decommission the tent and build over the top of it with permanent infrastructure. I envision that being a ways down the road, and that's really going to be driven by demand, what kind of growth we see in the market, as well as the financial position of the airport. That could a future project beyond phase 1B could be 5 years after phase 1B, or it could be 25 years after phase 1B. If we see rapid growth in the market and huge airline presence, then it's going to be on the faster side and vice versa. So we're really trying to take this in incremental form and fashion to make sure that it's something that's totally supportable by the airport and doesn't race away from demand, because we certainly don't want to overbuild and assume that we're seeing major growth coming. A lot of this is really geared towards maintaining what we have today and allowing for some reasonable growth in the market.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, I definitely support the direction that you're moving in the financing as well. And I'm hearing that from council. So it appears that you've got that kind of support to move forward in that direction.
Great. Well, I appreciate the attentiveness to the project. We're very excited about it, and we'll continue to move forward with the financing as presented, and we'll keep the council updated as the project evolves.
Thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, with that, we're going to move to the next topic on the direction needed items, which is downtown pedestrian and bicycle connectivity with Sarah Hill. And team, which is great. Thank you, team.
Yeah, good afternoon, Council. I'm Sarah Hill, Transportation Director, and we're here tonight at the request of Council to review some proposed alignments from the Animas River Trail to downtown. And then we're going to give a brief update on our current bicycle and pedestrian connectivity projects that are currently funded and underway. So I'm going to hand it over to Devin King, who is our multimodal administrator, and he'll cover the bicycle and pedestrian elements of the conversation. And then we have our Parks and Rec team here to talk about the Animas River Trail connections, as that's in their purview. So I'll go ahead and hand it to Devin.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, City Council, Devin King, City Staff. Am I driving this? Okay. So we'll start off with Midtown. I know that it's already come up in conversation this evening. So right now, the Midtown Safety Improvement Project, we basically are just bringing the conceptual plans out to the public. So this project actually originally started in 2021 is when it was funded. And that's when we started with an initial traffic study, which we ended up partnering with CDOT on because they are actually conducting a project with the 14th intersection signal. So we partnered with CDOT, had that traffic study, and then in 2022, that traffic study was completed. And at that point, we started taking a look at potential design alternatives. And so what this process looks like is we work with the consultant and engineers and we take a look at, okay, what is the intent of this project? So the Midtown's intent is for safety and connectivity, as the name implies, but specifically for multimodal safety and connectivity. But however, with that safety for multimodal improvements, that also improves safety for motor vehicles. So just want to make sure that that is captured. But what that project scope specifically, it was 15th, 14th, 13th Street, East 2nd Avenue, as well as the 3rd Florida 15th intersection. If nobody is aware, that intersection has several crashes with injuries, and it's not a great spot for bicyclists and pedestrians to navigate coming into town. So part of the project is looking at just different varying levels of connectivity from Florida as well as the Animas River Trail through Midtown, through what we formerly call downtown once you get on the south side of 12th. So yes, at this point, we have multiple alternatives, which we are having a public meeting for on May 23rd. I wish it was winter. So we're very early in the design process. Basically at this point, we haven't dove into the real hard engineering for the project because we'd like to get the public's feedback before we get to that point and make sure that we don't spend a lot of money getting to a engineering position that then we can't backtrack on. So this is kind of the initial, let's see what we can do and let's see what the public's reaction is to it. So that's where we are on that project. The Camino Crossing project is the underpass there at 12th Street. This is a project that has been talked about for a decade, if not two. And so currently that project, we're a little bit waiting to see where the Durango Fire Protection District is in terms of their site plan over at the old River City Hall site. So we're kind of, we're making to coordinate with them again. Before we spend all of the money on the hard engineering, we want to make sure that where we're planning alignment and everything will coalesce with what else is going on. So just trying to be strategically smart with those decisions. Okay. Here is just a quick, easy map. So the Camino underpass to the Animas River Trail near 12th Street is shown in the blue line. The green line is the Midtown project is suggesting a cycle track, a two-way cycle track. So what that is basically a two-way bicycle lane that is protected from vehicles. And the reason why we're proposing that on East 2nd Avenue is one, we already know that 2nd and 15th is a highly used intersection. We do counts every 2 years, and this September is actually another count that we'll be conducting, but every 2 years we've done this, and 2nd and 15th is always our highest intersection. So we're talking about over 200 bikes during a 2-hour period. and 90, pedestrians. So that cycle track to get folks into downtown is important for that reason, but specifically the right of way on East Second Avenue is a little bit narrow. So doing a cycle track actually saves some space compared to having just separate bicycle lanes. And then the purple, I'm not good with colors. That line is the requested connection that we were requested by City Council to look at last time, and that we're going to talk about. So regarding that requested alignment, it follows the railroad tracks from East 2nd and 15th to the 14th Main Avenue intersection. We did take a look at this back a year or two ago. It wasn't too in depth because there were some, obvious, I guess, constraints up front that, provided both the consultant engineer and staff concern. So one of the requirements is a clearance of 10 feet from the rail lines. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And then there is a steep grade drop off on the west side of the railroad tracks that then drops down into some of those existing businesses. But I would say one of the biggest factors is actually bringing that volume of bicyclists and pedestrians into Durango's busiest intersection with 35,000 plus 80 average daily traffic. Yeah, it's you're bringing it into a essentially 5-leg intersection if you count West 14th. So it's one of our busiest intersections, and bringing bicyclists and pedestrians and trying to maintain safety for all users. And that was a big concern for both staff and engineering. So real quick, just on the constraints. These measurements are not to be taken as exact precise, but if we go 10 feet out from each rail line in each direction, you end up with about 12 feet on each side, 11 feet in some cases. So, the ideal is a 10-foot shared use path. If you're going to go with that route, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of traffic. So 10 feet in width would be the minimum. Even at these days, we talk a lot about, especially with e-bikes and just higher traffic numbers, going even wider than that, 12 to 14. So yeah, with a 10-foot shared use path, you're very limited on space, and you'd be bumping up into those buildings in general, like just meeting the minimum. So that just kind of goes to that constraint. And while we do know that the Basin Printing building is up for, looking for new ownership, the other buildings are not, including the CenturyLink building. During this project, we have reached out to many of the businesses, and that includes CenturyLink. And we talked to them, and they have zero desire to get rid of that building because they are still using it. It's just not with people inside. So they have equipment in there that they have to come out routinely and take a look at that's important for their systems.
Thank you, Terry Nyken, Parks and Recreation Director. I want to first off just introduce Rachel Hart. I don't know if you had a chance to meet her. She's been here for 3 or 4 months now. She's our Parks, Open Space, Trails Design Manager, Landscape Architect, and excited to have her. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Rachel to explain this proposed or requested trail connection down by Santa Rita Park.
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. Thank you for your patience in my inaugural meeting like this, but put together this map that is a similar representation of the request from council to prepare a connection between Santa Rita Park and some of our other connections. It has lots of different colors showing the Animas River Trail in purple with some of the connector trails that are going up to downtown and to the apartment complex. And then the blue and the green represent 2 different alternatives to include connection nearly up to Horse Gulch and continue the Animas River Trail on the other side of Camino del Rio. So when I first started, I was given the task to read the entire poster master plan. So I became familiar with the blue line, which is something that's been discussed, I think, over maybe as many as 15 years. with using an existing crosswalk going through the Santa Rita Park across Camino del Rio, and then hugging Larry Valdez Way, and then possibly going under an underpass to cross Highway 3. That then will connect us into Horace Gulch and ultimately the Gig Line trail that ends on 8th Street College. That is still something that is being proposed and discussed. So since many years have passed, a new idea is presented. We are currently in the process of replacing the section of Santa Rita Trail heading south. And as a part of that, the bridge that I believe is nicknamed the Low Bridge area will be replaced. So in doing that, the green, and the words are covering it a little bit, but the green could then keep you on that side of the highway to avoid the other crossing of the blue. And then it would require another crossing across Larry Valdez, and then potentially continuing the rest of our poster plan of the blue. Next slide, please. So the considerations of the green proposed line adjacent to the highway is that it's in CDOT right of way. That comes with some considerations as far as permitting and such, which both options clearly would have that. There also is a potential wetland down in that ravine. And we would be required to cross Larry Valdez in another direction. In walking this area, it has a pretty significant vertical and cross slope. So the type of trail would be have a little more engineering involved with that. And also something that should be considered is the experience of walking on that side can be a little loud and uncomfortable with the traffic being so close. So those were the results of our reviewing of it, and can be used for further discussion.
Thank you so much. All right. Input from council.
I know in our Parks and Rec meeting that I was just at, your new goals for the river trail are 14 feet if you can. Is that right? Or what? I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
We're right now still at 10
10.
foot as far as what our standard is.
Okay.
There has been discussion about potentially going up to a 12-foot standard,
that's-
maybe even a 14-foot standard.
If it makes sense.
Also maybe a hybrid where if we could get to 14 feet in certain sections to allow some relief and some passing, we may go 14 feet for certain stretches and then go back down to 10. Just depends on the.
Because they talked about like bulb outs too and stuff. I just wanted to make sure if 10 was the minimum that we allow, and then it's up from there if it's
10 is our current standard.
Okay, great.
Just as a follow-up, if you would split directions, what is the width requirement? If you have one side, one trail going north and the other pathway going south, for example?
Oh, we got two trails, what would be the width requirement? We would have to look at that. I don't know if we had to have a standard unless you know.
I believe the ASHTO standard is 5 foot for each direction if you have a center line down the middle. So when you don't have the center line, you can actually have an 8-foot trail, just assuming that there's going to be some overlap either way and people will shift. But then as soon as you put a yellow solid line down the middle, it becomes that 5 foot.
Okay. Can I make some questions, comments? First of all, thank you for bringing this to council. I'll start with the one that you presented from the south. Yeah, I get it. I think a similar comment for the other one is you're going to have to cross Highway 550 in the blue line, which is a lot more impactful than not crossing 550. So that would be maybe an argument that we didn't anticipate if you make that crossing right there at I think it's great that we consider all the opportunities, and I would love to see the follow-up on cost and when we can make it happen. I think wetlands, we have ART on wetlands. There's solutions for everything, and I think this is great that we have it on the drawing. That's this one. For the other one, so obviously the distance is meeting the minimum standards from the buildings. I I think it's, to me as an individual counselor, important that we evaluate all options. It's very easy when I look at the package that there's reasons why we can't do anything. But I think it would be equally possible, just if I want to be the devil's advocate, to say if you follow the pink line, you're not crossing Main Avenue or 550, you're staying on the other side. So your actual impact to traffic is less, nor are you cycling along 2 blocks with car traffic and driveways. It's easy. You can go either way on the discussion. I just appreciate that you included it, and I hope that we include it as options when we reach out to our community. And hopefully also an idea on cost, because I think the cost of the purple line, I'm guessing, if it's a possibility, would be significantly less than the 2nd Avenue upgrade, and including the hill, because on 2nd Avenue, you're going to go up the hill to Buckley Park, and then you have to somehow go back to Main Street level. So there is arguments for and against. I hope we can positively and constructively look at all the pros and cons for each of the alternatives, present that to our community so we get the right feedback and we can make informed decisions that take all the options into account. The same applies for 3rd Avenue, because on 3rd Avenue, there was the start of this presentation, and you mentioned that earlier, the roundabout. So I know that since I was, maybe some background, I was on multimodal 2 years ago, and I asked for the options on a high level for the 3rd Avenue intersection, and that we never got the high level options. We ended up with the traffic study. That was probably a couple of months ago, I'm thinking, that we saw that. There's multiple options presented. And when I see the package that we're going to likely see next week, we only have 2 alternatives that are going to be presented versus all the alternatives. And the alternatives on 3rd Avenue that, can you go back on the screen with the, please, on the first start of this, where we have the block of the area of concern, or did I miss it? Oh, well then I guess it's now on this one. But on the comment you made that was going to be discussed today, on 3rd Avenue, you have 2 options going to be presented to council, one in a roundabout and one with the zigzagging structure of roads. And I think the traffic study that is not part of the package of the concepts shows other alternatives that, in my opinion, are going to be a fraction of the cost of the alternatives that are going to be provided. Again, I hope that we see all options and alternatives provided to our community, so we get feedback on all of those, and that we have an equally correct presentation of the pros and cons and costs for all those options. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so Sarah, you're the person who is in charge of the project at the end of 3rd Avenue, where there's a presentation with the crossing over the traffic or doing the roundabout.
Yes, the project manager is Devin King, multimodal administrator, and that falls under the transportation department. Yes.
Righty. Okay, so there's been some concern as soon as this plan came out there that there's not enough room to do a roundabout there, you know, concerning the elevations on the east side of 3rd and the west side. They're lower, then you got the river there. And also the residents there already gave land to the city many years ago to make that that interchange possible. And I'm getting feedback that they do not want to give any more land out. There's like a 90-year-old man living there who does not want his driveway impaired because he can't get in and out. The Anisis aren't going to give any more land. So I think at this point, there's a lot of blowback to having that the circle there, you know. And I also learned the fact that at 14th Street, many years ago, there was a turn left lane there. And if you go there and you look, you can tell the architecture, the the medium divide, what do you call it? Division in the middle of the road there, you can see where they had added the new structure to the old turn left lane. So we could go ahead and just do a turn left lane there since it was already there many years ago, instead of go ahead and rip up the end of Third Avenue where, you know, where the answer was to me when I said, I don't think that's a good idea about putting a circle in the middle of the street. Then somebody said, oh, we'll make it a mini circle, when the issue is many construction trucks go up Florida Road filled with, 9 yards of gravel in their dump truck, followed by like another, 6 or 7 in a utility trailer. And, pulling that through a mini turn circle. And with the variances on either side and with people not willing to give up more of their private property, I think we should just go ahead and consider not doing that.
Okay, hold on, if I can. I would love you to respond to Counselor Yazzie, please. But I just wanted to do a time check. It's almost 5 o'clock and we had allotted 15 minutes for this. So what we're ultimately trying to get out of this discussion is information or direction to staff on whether these options presented to us tonight are viable alternatives for staff to consider evaluating or not. So if you could please respond to Counselor Yazzie, and then we'll see where council lies with that.
That'd be great. Thank you for bringing up those topics, Counselor Yazzie. Staff did meet with the Anisis last week, or well, their son, Nick, and discussed all of that in detail. So, I mean, with this project, we're not looking at taking any sort of right of way that was brought up. So everything will be maintained within our existing right of way. But also, regarding the size and the alternatives and what had previously been at 14th, that was evaluated already with engineering aspects, taking a look into that. And there were concerns with site distance, as well as the elevation change on that side coming down from 14th as well. To Councilor Bossman's point, it was looked at in the traffic study alternatives and scenarios. And then regarding the mini roundabout and how that looks, so the engineers run turning templates and they take a look at how big, large trucks use that, and also at traffic flows and how that will impact the fire trucks, the Durango Fire Protection District trucks. And so they're able to take a look at that and see how those larger vehicles will handle these roundabouts. These mini roundabouts are placed in a lot of communities, Castle Rock, Manitou Springs, and these are commonly designed in places with thresholds such as Florida, 15th and 3rd. So that's just my quick overview on that. But we will be discussing that at the May 23rd public meeting.
Thank you. And I just to reiterate, Counselor Yazzie, I also spoke with the Anisis, and I was very happy to hear that staff was following up with them directly after I spoke with them. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with them, to hear them, to work through their concerns. It's made me feel a lot better.
All righty. So Devin, you're saying that you're going to continue with recommending the roundabouts because you're going to stay within the city of Durango's legal right of way.
Yes, that is the intent of the project, is to remain within the existing right of way. Again, the objective of this project was to investigate solutions for that intersection. So that does not necessarily mean that we're moving forward with either of the suggestions that are coming out to the public in this conceptual design. These were the ones that working with engineering, the consultant that we are using, that were suggested as the most viable.
And you're saying also, I heard you say that the 14th Street previous turn left lane, you looked at the elevations there, and that's a hardship for going forward with the turn left lane there.
Correct. That was one that was expressed from the consulting engineering firm. That was what they had brought to city staff.
Okay,
was
so
their
that's just
concerns.
an expression. That's not a study on that.
I cannot respond how much they looked
Okay,
into
so
it.
maybe we should do a study on doing that instead of just getting an expression.
I think we'll talk about it more on May 23rd. But right now,
It's a
Wait,
public-
wait,
it's a
wait.
public meeting. So if I may,
Okay, go ahead.
the May 23rd is a outreach to the community. And I think where my concern would be is I would like to see all alternatives presented
Yes.
and not it narrowed down. And if it requires more study, so
And
if we're going to the directional,
we heard you.
Would-
Yes, so if we could hear from the rest of council, we do need to wrap it up. We have a little bit of time for dinner and we start our city council meeting at 5:30. So can I hear from the rest of council?
I'll be quick. I want to say thank you for trying to keep it high level and not dive deep until you hear from residents, because I think that that's a great spot for everyone that's reaching out to us and with like concerns to come to that open house, or is that what it's called? Public forum, whatever you're calling it, and bring their concerns to you guys so you can see if one doesn't stick or does stick. Like that's part of the public process. And I'm a fan, and thank you so much for organizing and doing that and giving our citizens a chance to have a voice to come and talk about our concerns. That intersection, malfunction junction, is that what the people call it kindly, gives me anxiety every time I have to cross it. And so I'm excited to look at the different potentials. I would also, I'm kind of like on a different side seeing this, is that you presenting this and everything that you were able to lay out so quickly, it shows me and gives me like that you guys do look at all these potential and possibilities. Like it's not like you haven't looked at it. And I went and actually walked these stretches, and I, as a frequent traveler down the river trail from my house to downtown all the time, think that Second Avenue was one counselor. That Second Avenue path is way easier, more, I think more fluid for travelers. And then where you come out and like that coming out, even if you're not crossing Main Street, coming out right there is a little terrifying, I think, personally. And so I appreciate like one, you showing us that you have looked at it. It gives me like calm knowing like, hey, our staff is looking at all these potentials and I don't need to go apply to work in, the transportation or multimodal division to make sure that it's getting done, that I'm good here, creating policy and just making sure that it is. But it's a great, but I love that you presented this to us because it just gives us, I think, calm in that. And then I do appreciate that you're also looking at, and I'm hoping that with that blue connection trail, you're also taking into account Durango Mesa Park now, because that potentially will have a ton of traffic coming down Highway 3. And so that could change there as well. So, but thank you for your hard work. I can't wait to see what the public forum brings. And I'm excited, for how this is all going to come together. Thank you.
Councilor Woodruff.
I'll just be brief. I know we were all pressed for time. So I guess I'm probably in favor of the Second Avenue as well. For me, like being that close to the train, it's hard enough, operating a business that close to the train downtown. It scares the living daylights out of me when it blows their horn. So I couldn't imagine when it's going to be like 10 feet from them in that corridor. So, and I'm also scared to death of 14th and Main and Camino del Rio. I mean, there's, if you've ever waited for a pedestrian, I've seen plenty of near misses at that confluence. So I think the Second Avenue is a better option. Yeah, while I think it's great to look at the railroad corridor right there, I think there's a safer route in my opinion.
Great, thank you. I too agree that it's from a safety perspective, I'm very concerned about the average daily traffic numbers that you suggested on those streets. And I think Councilor Woodruff has a very good point about the proximity to the train, clearly also the landscape, all the issues that you've laid out. So I agree with Council Mayor Pro Tem Buell. I look forward to hearing the outcome of the public process and another future discussion about the Midtown Safety Project going forward, another discussion with council in a study session format, hopefully sooner than later.
Madam Chair, what is the direction that we're giving? Just so I know where clearly what are
That's a
we?
good question.
Okay, so basically what I heard in direction is we're just going to wait till we have the public forum on the 23rd after all this information.
We are going to, but what I'm hearing from three of us is that we support moving forward with the direction. I believe that staff is moving, looking at Second Avenue. I do as well. So there's three counselors to support that. and definitely following up after we have the public session on feedback that you received from the community.
Can I clarify, because maybe that was not captured? I support looking further into Second Avenue, but I would like to see the alternatives also presented. And the same with Third Avenue on the 23rd, which is a public meeting. I would like that meeting to include all the alternatives for the Third Avenue, 15th Street. So are we, is
So,
that the direction?
No.
Or are we going to say we're going to?
No, I don't think that's the direction. I think that I'm looking to staff. When you give so many options to people, it's nearly impossible to like figure out what the best option is. So I'm looking to staff to narrow it down to ones that make financial, like connectivity, like for me, like with this presentation, down the railroad doesn't make sense. I walked it, and so I agree with that. Oh, yes, thank you.
You guys are kind of.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
It seems like you have 3 people.
Yeah.
that are in
That's what I
favor
was
of
trying to say.
Only
Staff.
the
Yes.
options that the administration's come up with. You have 2 that may want extra options.
Thank you.
That's the direction, and you probably ought to just stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I appreciate that help. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And with that, we are going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.